Now, we all love Danganronpa. Okay, most of us, some of us, great. And we also love anime, right? So, combine those two factors together, and you get... it's not the best, but I love it. Danganronpa's anime is yummy and all, but ultimately bad for you. Luckily, I adore nothing more than sinking my teeth into a good processed meal. Well, I suppose Danganronpa 3 would be like a rat between two slices of bread. Now, I already went through Future Arc last time, and that was the worst of it for the most part. Its companion piece may have more scenes I wish were wiped off the face of the earth, but at the end of the day, it's the guiltiest of pleasures for me. Hence, allow me to take your hand in a non-sensual manner and lead you down the stairs of hope into the basement of despair that is Despair Arc. Yes, the analogies don't make any sense, but have you seen the source material? Anywho, enough dunking on this series. Taking the mick is my love language. Speaking of love, where else better to start than with the preceding premise of Despair Arc itself? Prepare to get mildly analytical, my friends. Why did I write that? See you after the title sequence, my friends. Ah, nice to see you again. What was that, 5-ish seconds? Too long, I miss you already. But not as much as I miss talking about this anime, so catch up. I'll be honest, as soon as Hope's Peak Academy opened its doors to my screen, my brain went instantly analytical. As much as they can shove these bright lights and character interactions into our faces, hey up, you can't fool me! This world feels fake, I'll say it. As a slice of life, the environment with all the happy, cheery, sunny days would fit right in. But in the world of Danganronpa, yes, something's up, no doubt. Seeing the second game's cast only amplified my suspicions since, let's move along the timeline a bit. In Danganronpa 2, Jabberwock Island is this colourful tropical paradise where nothing can ever go wrong. Then, lo and behold, it gets flipped around and transformed into Monokuma's own personal playpen. Hence, it makes sense to assume, at the very least, a world this open and inviting has to be hiding something. This is only made even more confusing with what's happening over in Future Arc. There, the world is dull and the walls aren't any better, and imagine my shock when the boring old building is suddenly a killing game. That contrast conflicts with our prior knowledge, painting an unknown, unnerving light over Despair Arc from the very first scene. Is that a red flag? What's he doing here? Hey, come back! A large part of this comes from the characters themselves. They are, for lack of a better word, authentic. Nekomaru still shits and shouts, Hiyoko still pisses everyone off, and Nagito is, well, I still don't really know. Regardless, they're all, well, themselves, which doesn't really add up, does it? In a typical narrative like The Killing Game, if you can call that typical, there's the expectation that normalcy is a facade, that everything gets cranked up to the max, so our darlings can cope with the horror around them, though Despair Arc shows us that's not the case. This is who they are. Through and through. This creates a dissonance between expectation and reality. The authenticity here clashes with the viewer's understanding of what these characters should act like, leading us on with a subtle sense of unease. It feels like something should be fake, but it isn't, and that contradiction becomes difficult to juggle. Juggle. That's a funny word. The environment's pulling weight here too. Visually and tonally, Despair Arc leaned into brightness with the warm lighting, the sunshine, everything's too gooey. On the surface, it signals safety, as it should. Yeah, we know better by now. In the context of the series as a whole, that very presentation raises a few eyebrows. The audience has already learned to associate too perfect with the opposite of positivity, so our POV clashes with what this place genuinely is. Unlike the rest of the series, where it's either darkness equals danger or cartoon evil and flashing lights equals Junko alert, Despair Arc's happy-go-lucky attitude doesn't immediately smack us with deception. Twistedly, the day-to-day life of the Academy isn't performative, it is, plainly, exactly what it claims to be. Thus, what's really going on here is even more hidden, and even harder to wrap your head around. It only gets worse through how the responsibility of this secret experiment situation is handled. The characters we, the audience, follow aren't actively involved with any hidden scheme. The closest we get is Jin Kirigiri, though he stands on the other end, opposing this stuff. The people actually involved and endorsing the evil, the steering committee ring a bell, remain invisible to us. As a result, there's no single visible point of deception within the cast itself. The people are real and living their lives as charmingly normal as they could be. The distortion lies in the structure surrounding them. Hope's Peak is its image. It doesn't get any clearer than that. The reputation it's constructed, carefully curated, affects how we perceive it, and it perceives itself. On one hand, you have the main buildings where all the marketing is. We get it's open, we get it's inviting, all that stuff. On the other, take a look at literally anything else. The reserve course building is this dull, sterile place where it seems the dress code doesn't only force you to wear a tie, but a frown as well. Yet even here, the individuals within these spaces are not inherently antagonistic. Hajime fights for the truth and the audience are jacked into his psyche early on, empathizing with him. Even the security team, even Juzo if we're scraping the bottom of the barrel, despite dressed in black and looking outwardly ferocious, they're not evil. Despair Arc could have been your standard good versus evil story, but no. The story it tells is of visibility versus obscurity. This is what ultimately reframes the source of tension. The villain is the system itself. Everything outside, everything we see right off the bat, is designed to inspire confidence with this constant reinforcement of excellence and success. That presentation is far from neutral. It shapes perception, guiding both characters and audience toward a specific understanding of reality while obscuring what doesn't fit that image. The result is a world where authenticity and artifice, new word, exist simultaneously without clearly contradicting one another. This creates a persistent tension that cannot be easily resolved because there's no single element to distrust. Instead, the unease comes from the relationship between all of them, the insecure vibe it gives off once all is strewn together. Naturally, it becomes impossible to fully relax into Despair Arc's lighter moments. Even at its most batshit goofiness, there's a seed of doubt in your mind, doubt centered around the world itself. All Hope's Peak does is present a version of itself that feels complete. The audience, aware that it's far from that, fills in the gaps, and it's within those gaps that the tension takes hold. Now, something a little more lighthearted, and that's just how nice it is to see the world of Danganronpa with its foot off the gas for once. It just chucks all of the bad stuff out of the window, and what we're left with is something cozy and lived in. It's not like most of the usual tropes went anywhere. Humor's relatively consistent, character energy's the same, Mikon still falls over, but eliminating the looming threat of death switches things up a bit. Compare that to Future Arc, which frames itself as a definitive endpoint, every action immediate and screaming for plot relevance. Despair Arc, by comparison, feels like a step back. Gives the audience space to observe, to sit with the characters for a while, rather than clutching at the guardrails, bracing for what happens next. That shift alone makes it inherently more inviting. But what makes this perspective particularly effective is how closely it mirrors the structure of Danganronpa 2. It's vaguely familiar, a group of students plopped in an environment together with the choice to get on or sit in the corner and do their own thing. Gundam chooses the latter in both scenarios, but he's Gundam Tanaka, he can do what he wants.
Open Sesame Pandemonium!
Anyway, point being that both the second game and Despair Arc have our characters' personalities bouncing off one another together in a chaotic but genuine way. Here, we can draw parallels between the free time events, getting to know characters individually, wondering if these scenes are canon or not. In Danganronpa 2, those moments define the small quirks and personal aspects of our cast, so seeing all of those things appear in Despair Arc is charming to say the least. The main difference here, though, is that these traits are no longer optional, it's just how these maniacs be, which does a little bit of reframing. In the killing game, like I alluded to before, these quirks often feel heightened, either as coping mechanisms or as exaggerated traits shaped by stress. There is always the lingering question of how much of a character's behaviour is genuine and how much is a response to their circumstances. Despair Arc quietly answers the question by removing the pressure entirely. Surprisingly, what's left is the same. killing game or not, this is how they act by default. It's a neat little realization, comforting even. There's something inherently enjoyable about watching these characters interact without a big evil AI whatever looming over them. But at the same time, it's difficult to separate that enjoyment from what we already know. These are the same people, expressing the same traits in a world that feels stable, yet that stability is temporary. Bittersweet! The freedom Despair Arc appears to offer is technically not entirely real, at least for us. The absence of danger doesn't override its inevitability. We know something's going to happen soon enough, it's just a matter of when and how. Because of this, the audience is overlooking the characters before their fate fully takes hold. There's nothing to escape yet, which makes it worse. Every cheeky moment of normalcy is coloured by the awareness that in time, the twin pigtailed face of despair will soon make its comeuppance. From that, we ask the golden question: how does this become what we already know it will be? The familiarity of the setting, the parallels to previous experiences, and goddammit the authenticity of the characters all feed into that question. Despair Arc declares an entirely new perspective. It allows the audience to see their beloveds as people within a world that feels, at least on the surface, functional, rather than a wacky, despair-inducing adventure of zany little gags and tricks. And in doing so, it sheds light on something the series usually doesn't. That the most unsettling parts of Danganronpa, unsettling being a key term here, happen without pressure at all. That trap of normalcy shows us how easy it can give way from so little intervention. Let's move on. Let's talk about what a slice of life is, Because Despair Arc sure ain't one. It adopts the basic hallmarks from their day-to-day structure to a single central protagonist, but strips away the most important and basic element: space. A traditional slice of life is still. It allows the characters to breathe and exist a little bit without constantly shoving toward narrative urgency. Despair Arc, by contrast, is just loud. Scenes start playing out, then they're cut off, redirected, Ibuki comes barging in or something. There's so many different perspectives and characters competing for attention at once. Chisa may be our center of gravity in the story, but all the planets she brings into her orbit are fumbling at the chance to collide with her. We cut to Munakata, Junko, Jin, not that Jin, Hajime, hell, the entire of Class 77B, and Nagito sometimes. Because of this, Despair Arc feels uniquely dense, denser than... I can't think of anything. Instead of urgency billowing through every scene, it manages to feel just as packed through oversaturation. The result is a hydraulic press of a narrative where every scene feels somewhat relevant to one of our characters' lives, minor or major, to the point of overload. This creates a subtle but important contradiction in how the arc is experienced. On the surface, it does feel relaxed, a reprieve from the ever-ambitious future arc, yet this sense of calm, as most things in this series are, is largely illusory. Beneath that presentation, the rhythm of the storytelling remains unyielding. We have this whole stage play of happiness before us to mask the structure subtly pushing us forward backstage. This mismatch plays into that unease I mentioned earlier, a sense that something is off long before the story descends full tilt into despair. Because of this, Despair Arc establishes even more contrast and similarities with its companion piece. While there are plenty of differences between said arcs, the defining factor isn't what you'd expect. From fast-paced action to slice-of-life goodness, surely it'd be the pacing, right? It'd be the pacing, yeah? Well, that's where this argument bulldozes through that belief, I'll tell you now. The pacing from future to despair, that is a hard thing to say. The pacing from future to despair is incredibly equal, while what sets them apart is tonal. The rhythm of the narrative continues as these episodes alternate between each other, effectively depriving the viewer of any semblance of respite. You might as well hold your breath, it's not likely you'll be given a chance to grab any more. Best way I can describe it is like two parallel roller coasters, right? Traveling at the same speed with the same loops, the same G-force and the same adrenaline. One screams at the rider to follow along, that's Future Arc, while the other just shoves a bunch of flashing lights and expensive sets together and calls it a day. Regardless, they move at the same pace. Ultimately, Despair Arc is the YouTube algorithm of Danganronpa media, and I just noticed the elephant in the room. Junko! Junko! This here anime gives us a little peek into what Danganronpa's fabled antagonist looked like in her prime. That's great and all, but one thing I'd love to focus on here is how we see her, the audience. Bold statement, viewing Junko through a retrospective lens fundamentally changes, that's not what I put, fundamentally reshapes, good synonym, how Despair Arc is experienced. From the outset, the outcome is not in question. The series makes no attempt to obscure where this story leads, and because of that, every moment with her is the temperature gauge for how fucked we are. I don't need to remind you how we already know the ending, so seeing Junko stepping closer to her goal by the second, it really emphasises that sense of shortcoming. After all, she's the catalyst, the one leading us toward the reality we're all too familiar with by this point. Moments that would typically carry even a smidge of lightheartedness are overshadowed by the existential dread and understanding that the clock is ticking. It becomes difficult to fully invest in the present when the future is so clearly defined. The mind begins to filter what it sees, prioritizing details that feel relevant to the larger outcome over those that exist purely in the moment. As a result, Despair Arc is more of an autopsy. If anything, the whole arc feels like a flashback, some kind of Batman investigator mode type shit, reconstructing what used to be for the sole sake of giving context. In that sense, the closer we get to the end, the less and less Despair Arc feels like a story. It's similar to how we look at Future Arc. OG cryptid enjoyers, like I'm assuming you are, would recognise this point from earlier in the last video. Because of our connection to the mainline series, how invested we already are, we feel clued in to analyse every scene rather than simply enjoying it like a normal person. The anime is answering the question of what happened while we're asking how. It seems insignificant, and it probably is in all fairness, but that inkling of extra eagerness goes a long way, especially combined with how too perfect Despair Arc seems from the get-go. Even Junko herself becomes less of a character in her own right and more of a subject to analyse. Her presence dominates every scene solely because she is the Omega. She embodies the endpoint this narrative is speeding towards. In that light, the lighter moments lose a degree of permanence. They become contrast, points of calm that highlight the storm to come. As the audience, with our beady little eyes, we're wholly aware of this, and so we begin treating them differently. There's less inclination to sit in the cutesy atmosphere when you know it's collapsing soon. At least in a standard narrative, there's some unclearness going on. Even if you see the signs, there's still hope that it might work out. You think we have that luxury here? Hell no! That disconnect leads us to speed past the kindness and aim straight for the core, whatever semblance of a clue it can give us, whatever we can store in our minds for later as possible trivia. I mean, the best part about it is that none of this is deliberate, it's all a side effect of our own perception. Plop, a new viewer. Plop. New viewer in the middle of this, and not only would the shit show throw them into tonal whiplash so fast they might as well ride a tornado for less, but they'd just watch it. Plainly. Okay, the V3 video's coming soon. I'm getting my licks in early, but can you blame me? She's funny. She's funny. She is funny. I can perfectly reproduce. That's just funny, man. Regardless, Junko links back to all this because she is the heart of the madness. Don't get it twisted. She couldn't have a heart if she carved a hole and lined it with titanium. But her rise is absolution. She is the process already set in motion before her weird 2000s high school bully ass voice shows up. And because of that, Despair Arc switches from a story about what is actually being lost and more about understanding the mechanics of that loss. How something that appears stable, even joyful, can be dismantled piece by piece until only the outcome remains. Dun dun dun! How's that for a first chapter, eh? So, this is Intermission Tid popping in here. That's Cryptid and Intermission portmanteaued together to move us on to the next chapter. All about character analysis! Yay! I'll be analysing the characters in this one. Hey. Okay, so it's not my strongest of explanations, but hey, whatever, man. Expect me to dig deep into these folks and even revisit some familiar faces. Yeah, that's got, retention. I'm looking forward to it, as should you. But let's not fade out on a bad note, right? So I'll see you after this wacky light show of a title sequence. Fade to black. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Yes, I made it rhyme again. I'm truly a genius. Oh, there's a motorbike. But you know who else is a genius? Chisayuki Zome, of course, the golden child herself. First thing I think we can all agree on is that Chisa genuinely believes in others. Across the series, we see her constantly go out of her way for her class, to the point she'll even stand in Juzo's line of fire to protect the inexperienced. It comes naturally to her as the ultimate housekeeper. Her parental instincts must be off the charts. She treats every child as her own, which I'd argue is the key to why she's such a good teacher. It's one thing to blend in and go undercover, but to go above and beyond so much, especially when it makes you stand out. If anything, taming the most notoriously explosive class in under a day, it speaks to her authenticity. That drive and charm is what makes Chisa's character so memorable, because she treats the characters we love with consideration and patience. It draws us closer to her as she earns our respect through how she reacts to the chaos. One neat little detail I noticed about Chisa is how her initial tone and mannerisms feel deeply realistic. She presents as polite, beaming, a little jittery, even exaggerated. All things that make us go, yeah, she's definitely put it on a front. Though it's relatively short-lived, she quickly warms up to the class, and what you soon realise is that the face Chisa puts on when she enters the academy is just her, but cranked up by a few digits. She isn't this huge, whoa, goofy, crazy person one second and deeply introspective the next. One second she's nervous, the other she's less nervous. That aligns much closer with how the average person deals with new, exciting situations. We might enter a new school or job, being us, but more neutral, a little heightened, just to soothe our anxieties while getting a feel for our environment. Over time, we may soften and become acquainted with the usual day-to-day, revealing more of ourselves in little bites. Chisa embodies that, creating an acute connection to the viewer. Even if we're not as cheerful or as caring as she is, we can relate to those first few hours, where we're more a bag of nerves than a bag of productivity. Regardless, I appreciate that portrayal. In addition to this, a defining part of Chisa's character that's shown more than told, I don't know why I struggled to say that, is her reliance on physical interaction. She touches everyone. In Danganronpa, or in any context that sounds bad, as it should, but get your mind out of the gutter. This is Chisa we're talking about. It's wholesome. She views physical touch as a means of communication in itself, with the power to soothe, harm, and unravel without speaking a single word. She scolds you one second, then holds your head in her hands the next. Chisa believes that actions speak louder than words, and that sometimes words can do more harm than good. Words get messy, with pesky interpretations, Lord forbid language devices, and don't even get me started on inflections. I've been studying them for years and I still can't get a hand of how to use them correctly. Actions, though, are final and directly reacted by the receiver of those actions. Words have so much more value when grounded in something physically tangible. It's an interesting way of honing the world that reflects off her talent. Sometimes you're wrestling with a vacuum against a rough carpet, but the next minute you're dusting off a precious ornament. Being the ultimate housekeeper is rooted in different gradients of touch, making things presentable through physicality. To see her do the same with those around her really grounds who she is as a character. So much of Danganronpa has the talents be a means to an end, barely relevant to the character at all. They're usually shaped by past experiences or traumas. If not, their talent becomes their entire personality. Hello, Nekomaru. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just hello, Nekomaru. To see Chisa represent her roots in softer, more subtextual ways really shapes up the usual formula in a way that makes me treasure her even more. Though a large flaw in Chisa's character does stem from this. She always jumps to that concrete style of interaction. When Ryota breaks down, she comforts him physically before speaking. With Chiaki, she uses touch to redirect her attention and ground her. Even with Hajime, when her words fail to break through his pessimism, she instinctively closes the distance between them, attempting to connect more directly, though not always successfully. And, most important of all, can't win over baby gangster with words, drive a knife through his desk, that'll do it. Point being, that colour of interaction is always the crutch, something she jumps to if she feels unconfident or her words don't stick. Her later chat with Nagito highlights this best. After seeing her words fail before, she just lets him talk. Then, before even opening her mouth, she slaps him silly and immediately pivots, coddling his little cheeks like a doll. It's evident to us that she becomes even more reliant as the series persists, something that could turn ugly if not adequately noticed and controlled. Personally though, I'd have high hopes that Chisa's self-aware enough to notice she's heading down that route, but then again, we'll never know. She's dead now, so... Oh, one more thing. When she's brainwashed into ultimate despair and that whole thing, her first instinct is to love bomb Chiaki to oblivion. If we're to believe that despair takes your most impactful traits and twists them to achieve its goal, then that matters. It reinforces the idea that this behavior is fundamental to who she is. Looping back on her optimism, I take issues with it. Oh yeah, I do, yeah.
I don't like him. Whenever he's around, my day goes south like majorly.
While it's one of her defining traits, I can pick out the undercurrent of pressure she places on herself to be like this all the time. From her first scene, she's juggling making a good first impression and livening up the atmosphere, trying to get her quirks across immediately and show Jin she's got this, all while snapping back to the pristine posture of a Yoha unit like a goddamn bobblehead. There's a sense of insecurity. Actually, I'd say it's more like self-consciousness. She's very aware that's the person she wants to be in every person's eyes, rather than actually critical of herself negatively. Regardless, her nerves mix with her ideas, yeah? And instead, you get this weird unbalance of someone who constantly has to pull herself back to the center and keeps getting carried away screaming rotten orange in everyone's faces. If ADHD had a face. In fact, it goes even further through how she strives to adapt to every gosh darn student in this goddamn academy. Whether that means picking up a six string to rock out with Ibuki, attacking Fuyuhiko's desk, because I'd imagine that's not the first time someone played five-finger fillet on that thing, or entertaining Teru Teru. Ugh. Now, it's pretty admirable to be adaptable like that, but let's not get ahead of ourselves with the dangers of keeping it up 24/7. Her constant drive to maintain positivity and unity can push her into some compromising situations. Her insistence on teamwork, for instance, inadvertently led to poor decisions, such as the class splitting up to go look for Mikan right in the middle of a riot. Her desire to uphold an ideal image leaves her strained behind the scenes. Aww. Unfortunately, Despair Arc sucks. Despair Arc sucks in the fact that we don't get to see more of that explored. That wasn't the whole sentence. The darker side of her optimism could have been a super cool foil to her character, the positive impact she's made being interrupted by burnout. But I guess we already had enough problems going on by that point, so benefit of the doubt there. Still, Lord forbid we humanize our characters a bit. Though, despite us inferring her mental strain, Chisa's incredibly strong-willed. Junko didn't even stand a chance with brainwashing so tame, even Mukuro surprised. If this were Danganronpa, if Mukuro, it'd be a much more astonishing feat. Anywho, we'll get to that bit later, but I am thrilled with how impactful that breaking point is. In the end, her defining trait, her unwavering dedication to others, both empowers and destroys her. She resists despair for as long as humanly possible, enduring immense suffering in the process. Having a character so deeply rooted in compassion and connection at the center of this story provides a powerful contrast to the flawed and fractured individuals around her. But, dear viewers, do you know who's a good example of that fraud and fractured individual? Flawed. That's right, Jin Kirigiri is. Our boy Jin cares a lot about Hope's Peak, why wouldn't he? I mean, he's not exactly front and center in Despair Arc, I mean, who is? But he still leaves an interesting impression, especially as one of our only Danganronpa 1 parallels on this side of the anime's fence. Interesting thing to note about Jin. Jin. Interesting thing to note about Jin, I can't say it, is his empathy. Nagito's a prime example here yet again. He doesn't get his own analysis in this video, but by God is he in everyone else's. It appears to us that despite what the higher-ups are parroting to him, Jin has a genuine curiosity to understand why Nagito did what he did. To Jin, someone who joined via luck is more than the piece of trash he sells himself to be. Luck is a talent, fuck it, why not? That willingness to look beyond surface-level judgments is what makes Jin's empathetic approach to leadership so potent, especially considering he's the human face behind this shady academy. That contrast does leagues by itself. Though, admittedly, his empathy seems tied to his role as headmaster. With how formal he is and how responsible he views himself, we can tell he sees his position as highly influential, which it is. Because of this, he has to strike the fine balance of being the top dog authority figure and being compassionate. Jin understands that he must remain stern and capable of making difficult decisions, while also recognizing the motivations behind students' actions and the emotional consequences those actions carry. He'd be surprised how foreign that concept is. Not everyone takes leadership as mindfully as he does, I'll tell you that. However, and here's your little switcheroo, delving deeper reveals just how personal that empathy is. His estrangement from Kyoko and the years he spent separated from her appears to shape how he interacts with the students. Jin could easily detach himself and become this soulless goblin that's all work, work, work. But I'm happy to see he actually recognizes that part of himself. He knows he's a caring, devoted guy, so he redirects that suppressed care he never got to share with his daughter outward. The entire academy receives that love. In plain English, and this is the coolest part, he sees echoes of his daughter in them. That's why he made such a selfless choice. This duality defines his character. On one hand, he carries the detachment of a man who spent years isolated and burdened by responsibility. Trying to read him off his first scene just comes back sad. But on the other, as we learn later, he's driven by unresolved longing and regret over the choices that cost him his relationship with Kyoko. What a tragedy. See what I did there? Huh? Yeah. As if it couldn't get any worse for old Jin, enter the Kamakura Project. Now enter the tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy. Now enter a board of losers giving the go-ahead on the former and scrambling to cover up the latter. Poor Jin wants to lead with integrity, yet he's forced to operate within a system that undermines his values at every turn. Despite his frustrations though, he continues to trust his superiors, like Tengan, showing us how ingrained he must be in authority. Even when it costs him personally, he always obeys his superiors. Yep, now I understand why he ran off from his dad. Dude was raised on cult traditions. Ultimately, Jin is required and defied and defined by his willingness to act in accordance with his principles. Even when faced with the world burning down around him, he rejects retreat before it even enters his mind. His final decision to remain at Hope's Peak and face what comes next reflects both his sense of duty and his willingness to accept responsibility. Oh, he's just so intently rooted in empathy and care, and I love it. But also, yeah, he's placed in an impossible situation. Who can blame him? Now, eat me, nom nom nom, because it's time for, roll the clip. Mukuro Ikusaba, the 16th student lying hidden somewhere in this school, the one they call the ultimate despair. Watch out for her. Ooh, Mukuro, yeah, woo! Mukuro, yeah, woo! Yeah! As we see her in Despair Arc, she's pretty alright. Defined by her deathly loyalty and disturbingly icky devotion to her sister Junko Enoshima. Now, you'd expect the ultimate soldier to be this hardened motherfucker with like razors for teeth and chains for flossing tape. But never mind, she's just this soft-spoken, timid little darling who can do no wrong apart from work for the most heinous terrorist organization to ever exist. She shows up all like, ooh, Junko, I'm so at your behest and like fully in love with you. Nah. Chapter 3, Character Assassination, Mukuro Ikusaba. Let's take a step back for a minute. Yes, I think Mukuro was mishandled here a little bit, but I'll leave that for later on when I can fully sink my teeth into the topic. For now, yeah, Mukuro is a living subversion. Around Junko, Mukuro softens significantly, showing genuine fondness, smiling and seeming content simply to be in her presence. However, as fit for anyone remotely connected to Junko, this dynamic reveals a deeper insecurity. Mukuro clearly views herself as beneath those around her, particularly, the despair goddess herself. She appears visibly startled when addressed directly or made the center of attention, as if she's blissfully blind to being treated as an individual. Instead, she's at her most comfortable when Junko speaks at her rather than to her, allowing Mukuro to remain passive, nodding along like an idiot and executing whatever plan is given. As a result, Mukuro suppresses her authentic emotions and adopts the persona of a cold, unfeeling soldier. In reality, she's Not that at all, but to her credit, she's self-aware enough to play the part. At the very least, she can act like your stereotypical badass 90% of the time. To her, obedience is all she's good at, and earning Junko's attention through that is enough to convince herself her love's at least slightly requited, even if it only comes in the form of despair. That's her fuel source. That's her fuel source. That's her fuel source. That's her fuel.
She's hit her final form!
This duality becomes evident in how she presents herself to others. When interacting outside of Junko's presence, such as ordering the siren's call on the student council, Mukuro becomes detached and mechanical. Once given a directive, she abandons all visible emotion and carries out her orders with ruthless precision. Point A to point B. As much as I joked about it, that's pretty clear evidence that Mukuro runs on Junko's wants and needs. Doing nothing? Boring. Doing something for Junko? Precision. Get back home and Junko says, "You smell less like a dog's diaper than yesterday?" Heart eyes, let's do it again tomorrow. Yet, cracks in this persona emerge when she's caught off guard, like when Junko FNAF jump scares herself into Mukuro's face and demands she sings, right in the middle of a murder room. She blushes. Alright, never mind, you win despair arc, I like this Mukuro now. oh, there's the red flag again. That moment lays Mukuro's emotional inexperience bare. These reactions suggest that Mukuro has conditioned herself so thoroughly as a tool that she no longer understands how to engage in any normal or, heavens to Betsy, kind behavior. She's so used to killing folk that she's face blind to niceness. Nah, she absolutely plays rhythm games with the volume off. Evil git. What this reveals is Mukuro's internal philosophy. Her identity is built entirely around expectation. Soldiers are meant to kill, to obey, and to deliver cold, calculated responses. Anything outside of that framework leaves her disoriented. Hence, why we only get to see her soften when it's unplanned, or if it's just her and Junko. Now, an interesting side to Mukuro and Despair Arc is just how little she seems to care for the intent behind her actions. She functions best when everything's clearly defined for her, as long as each step is concrete. Say this, batter that guy, kidnap the weird one. That's hardly a task. Mikan comes on her own. No, I didn't mean that. She can very easily process that as a checklist without pondering the big ideas behind it. This task-oriented mindset allows her to operate efficiently while remaining disconnected from the larger implications of her actions. Unfortunately, that's all I can really make out Mukuro to be. Despite her belief that she understands her individual role, Mukuro ultimately lacks true self-awareness. As I said, she'd rather lick Junko's boots than question her ideology. This version of Mukuro ain't driven by a philosophical attachment to despair, but rather an obsessive attachment to her sister. Her devotion overrides any deeper comprehension of ideology or consequence. There's the activation moment where she locks into performing tasks, but that's pretty much it. Mukuro emotionally nullifies herself to function as an instrument. Well, I guess an instrument's too strong of a word. Think more a grand piano, one that's out of tune, left in a garage for years, or a garage if you're weird. Randomly shows up, freshly varnished in some non-canon spin-off, and then the second it gets a proper canonical stage appearance, it's immediately obliterated by 500 reserve corps sized pianos falling from the ceiling. It's as though she spends most of her time dissociated, only resurfacing in the aftermath when she and Junko observe the destruction together. In those quiet moments, Mukuro briefly re-emerges as a person, revealing the fragile, dependent individual hidden beneath the soldier, yet, fleetingly, we never receive any true depth to that. But hey, I tried, and I'm glad to see Mukuro appear fully animated with a kick-ass design regardless. Speaking of kicking asses with guardrails, Natsumi Kuzuryu! I actually really like Natsumi for some reason.
I'm a super high school level little sister, and this place is Loserville.
She immediately poisons us with Fuyuhiko's energy, radiating it so convincingly I almost thought she was actually radioactive. Turns out she's just really reflective tinfoil. Natsumi fully believes she's all that simply because her brother is, so she copies him and hopes for the best. From a viewer's perspective, it works precisely because of Fuyuhiko. Having experienced his character in Danganronpa 2, it's clear there's a heart beneath the venom when it comes to these kind of fronts, and we're right on the money with that. If she were anyone else, Natsumi's behaviour would piss us all off, and while that still definitely happened, the blow is softened, not just because of Fuyuhiko, but because of how painfully obvious it already is that she isn't cruel for cruelty's sake. Her hostility is rooted in deep insecurity, which she masks through aggression and projection. In many ways, she feels like the poster girl for psychology. Yeah, bullies only do it because they're insecure. It's the most basic premise everyone's mum, dad, mates, and Nagitos have heard before. Despite embodying such a simple-to-read premise, Natsumi remains compelling due to the context surrounding her. Her situation is uniquely pressurized, shaped by the expectations of the Yakuza world. I mean, she lives in the shadow of some overwhelming figures, man. Like her father, the head of a powerful organization, her brother, the heir, and an ultimate student. Surrounded by success, Natsumi struggles to establish her own identity. Her self-image is clearly diminished as she constantly measures herself against Fuyuhiko. She wants to be useful to him to meet what she perceives as his standard of excellence. To be fair, she's nailing it so far. Be an asshole to everyone and stain yourself with fury. Right on the money, might as well write that on his tombstone at this rate. This pedestalization is what drives her to screech at every being in a 12-mile radius. In trying to embody strength, intelligence, and composure all at once, she collapses under the pressure as any normal person would. She doesn't know what role she's meant to fill, so she attempts to be everything, and ends up with no clear direction. Now, the key difference between Natsumi and her brother here, though, is control. His abrasive personality is mapped down to a T. It defines him because he's honed it and shaped it to be his own.
I'm fucking coming for you, Makoto.
Natsumi, by contrast, lacks that control. Without direction, her behavior escalates from, yeah, she's kind of annoying, to, now you're just being mean for no reason. It's an unfortunate position that's only made worse by the fact her actions isolate her further. She thinks pushing herself away from everyone is the intended effect, soon realizing she wasn't built for this, that it hurts to be alone and feel like nothing. She becomes genuinely tragic in that moment because we empathize with her position. The weight of the world she's in pushes her down paths she was never meant to walk. And now you've got someone who isn't like her brother, someone who might actually enjoy having friends or being kind, stuck in a situation where she sees no way out. Had someone extended consistent empathy toward her, like Hajime briefly did, there's a strong possibility her trajectory could have changed. In another environment, Natsumi might have developed into someone far more stable and, most importantly, able to choose her own path, rather than being consumed by the pressure to prove her worth. It sucks. Then she's bonked on the head, and oh, look, it's the next character in the chapter, Sato. How exciting.
If you hurt her, I am gonna make you pay.
Sato, also known as Mahiru fan number 1, is a fun character to analyse, because while she appears as two-dimensionally fake as a slice of American cheese, there's... okay, I don't need to sell it to you. Of course there's more depth to her than American cheese, really? That's what I chose to write. Man, she's fiercely protective of Mahiru, so much so she goes the extra mile in micromanaging her entire image at the academy. Even the most fake smiling slight against Mahiru was enough to provoke Sato into something resembling the devil from the Bible. However, based on the limited screen time she has, we can already infer something a little deeper, alright? For some reason, Sato has a habit of saying anything so long as it gets Mahiru's approval. She's all like, Mahiru, I love your sandwich. And Mahiru's like, you ain't even tried them, silly. I got it, you faker. You faking it. She praises things she hasn't even experienced and tells Mahiru exactly what she wants to hear, prioritizing her approval over anything close to honesty. This pattern continues even after she kills Natsumi, as she attempts to maintain this facade that everything's okay because she knows that'll calm Mahiru down and shoo her away from looking deeper. Not to mention, the more she downplays her involvement, the less connected and suspicious she is. I suppose there's some self-preservation there, but based on what we've seen from Sato up to that point, I'd argue she's more afraid of being suspected because if someone kills her over what she did to Natsumi, she can no longer be around to protect Mahiru and make her happy. From these examples, it's clear her sense of reality has become intertwined with this one-sided infatuation. Sato convinces herself this friendship is genuine, when in reality, it's built on submission. She depends on Mahiru for her own sanity. Newsflash here for you. That's surprisingly not how things usually go. By constantly bending herself to fit Mahiru's expectations, she creates this illusion that they're inseparable. In that sense, I feel really bad for Mahiru. She's given her all and placing genuine trust in Sato, believing that relationship is real, when she's the only one who's actually dropped the mask. It would hit her like a ton of bricks if she ever realised Sato was just playing a role to keep her happy. Ironically, Sato's protectiveness does more harm than good. What starts as Natsumi being a dick escalates to warfare in like 2 seconds the moment Sato opens her mouth. That escalation directly leads to Natsumi's death. Her misplaced loyalty creates the worst possible outcome, showing just how tangled she is in her own web of delusion. To everyone else, Sato's behaviour completely distorts Mahiru's image. It makes it look like she sat on some ultimate throne carved from the skulls of lesser photographers, sending out reserve course normies to fight on her behalf and boost her ego. In reality, I don't need to tell you that's not the Mahiru we know and love, but that's the picture Sato ends up painting, and it doesn't exactly make her look good, does it? Another note about Sato's character is how hasty she is to swing at anyone and anything. Listen, I get it, there's been tension between her and Natsumi for at least a few generations, but no number of petty threats justifies jumping to murder within minutes. Especially in a place like this, a prestigious school where that kind of thing doesn't happen. Hope's Peak might treat the reserve course like dirt, but at the very least, they're not out here killing each other. Yet. Point being, I can only point to her being mentally unstable. Talk about a hard-hitting sentence there, eh? She even hints at it herself. Oh, look at these scars that miraculously appeared only after I intervened in a fight between Natsumi and Mahiru in middle school. It's clear whatever their rivalry was had been going on for quite a while. So much so, Sato genuinely believes Natsumi is capable of killing her. Either way, you can speculate about the cause, but the effect is clear. It leaves Sato insecure, volatile, and deeply warped by what she's been through. It just shows just how much bullying can damage someone that young, and alongside Mahiru, it reinforces that no amount of talent or status overrides basic humanity. And that's why I like Sato. It's like she actually exists. She acts her age, but under pressure that's been building for years, slowly breaking her down. And the best part is how quickly we see it happen. We're not told her past, but we infer it from how she falls apart in the present. To expand on the why Sato does what she does, there's definitely a hint of insecurity thrown in there. She views herself as expendable and becomes overwhelmed by the possibility of harm coming to herself or Mahiru. Faced with that fear, she acts impulsively and destructively. Yet, a testament to her humanity once again, she feels genuinely guilty. Most people can't even comprehend around the idea of murder, let alone actually doing it. Sato definitely can't. She wraps herself in denial and convinces herself it was suicide, shedding light on how unstable she is, yet also how human. Anyway, Sato's great, whatever, moving on to another black-haired character. Yes, that's all these two have in common, and yes, it's enough to be considered a segue. Hi, it's me, Zuru Kamakura. Even armed, you will not survive this. Even armed. Who did this guy think he was, bro? Oh, we love a bit of Izuru here, don't we? Detached and morally ambiguous, Izuru functions as a reflection of the audience.
Even armed.
In many ways, he's us. Despite having one of the most fantastical backstories since Gundam, including but not limited to brain alteration, possession of every talent imaginable, and being the pinnacle of human capability, his role and despair arc is to only observe. It doesn't get much more badass than that. Izuru himself is a paradox. Ooh, a fascinating one. A godlike figure who chooses to simply be passive. Like the audience, he watches events unfold without committing to either hope or despair. However, his eventual alignment with... what's that woman called again? I don't think we mentioned her in this video yet. Junko Enoshima? Izuru aligns with Junko Enoshima simply based on the circumstances. Despair is the instigator in this mess, while hope remains reactive. Therefore, he's basically peer pressuring himself into siding with despair because it's convenient. Once again, showboating for the sake of looking cool. In order to witness conflict, he sides with the force that initiates it. What this does is paint a question mark over Izuru's head. He's so ambiguous, yet he's supposed to be the enemy, though even stranger, every step he takes is with grace and passivity. He doesn't even feel like the be-all end-all threat because he's never sent a stage. Instead, our boy blends in. He acquaints himself with the attacking group because it keeps him undercover. He's just another figure in the background, observing without being the weird edgy guy stood in the middle of the battlefield sticking out like a sore thumb. Because of this, he bombards himself with even more colourful personalities. You know, why bother about this Slenderman looking ass guy when there's a Yakuza, a swordswoman, a shonen protagonist, pop singers, and bone meal hair walking around killing everyone? That carries into future arc as well, even when he appears alongside the other remnants of despair on that shiny, beautiful LCD screen. He doesn't stand above them. Despite the name he carries, he causes the least chaos and hides among the rest, making himself no more of a priority than anyone else. Izuru levels the playing field, deliberately shrinking his presence so he's harder to target. Now, what strengthens Izuru even further is his unwavering adherence to his own logic. Every step he takes is some deliberate, consistent, 10 steps ahead of you scheme, making him both unpredictable and unsettling. The audience expects him to act, to do something. Oh, Izuru, please just whack all the bad guys in like 5 seconds so I can put it in my TikTok edit. Please! He rarely does that, if ever. Instead, he creates tension through stillness alone. Him just being there is weighty. Him just being there is weighty. His reputation precedes him by miles. Another great use of show don't tell here from the Danganronpa verse. Characters react to him with fear, whispers and awe. Whisper the name Izuru, and it's like that Ratatouille meme over and over. Even Junko, the Devil's PR team herself, takes a unique interest in him and notably refrains from attempting to control him. Usually because it's physically impossible. But there, that's it! They showed, not telled.
Even armed, you will not survive this.
While Izuru's identity hinges on myth, alas, his chosen role is almost underwhelming. Correction, underwhelming. He becomes an observer, and a damn good one at that. It's such a good contrast to have the almighty feared guy presented as something extraordinary, bright, almost artificial, acts minimally. Like a fluorescent light, Izuru's blinding but unnatural, shining without warmth. He frequently describes the world as boring, but this boredom stems from a fundamental disconnect. Izuru doesn't truly understand desire, like, at all. His reasoning is purely analytical. His mind goes a bit like this. Yes, I'll do the voices too, just for you. Yeah, let's do it. Stagnation equals no progress. No progress equals boredom. Boredom equals undesirable. Undesirable equals negative. Conclusion: throw a tantrum as the average human would. As you can see, this logic lacks something pretty huge: emotion. Despite embodying the ultimate capability, he cannot define a meaningful path forward. He can define a path, but that's pretty much it. Meaningful equals inconclusive, or whatever, man. Funnily, this makes him directionless. Stripped of his humanity, he becomes something akin to a machine, capable of processing information. Oh my, there's cars going past every 5 minutes. Anyway, capable of processing information, but incapable of experiencing it. Without emotional reference points like joy, fulfillment, or catharsis, he's got no ground to bounce off. Thus, his worldview becomes binary, expecting outcomes because they're statistically inevitable rather than significant in any way, shape, or form. However, the most compelling aspect of Izuru lies beneath the surface. Good old Hajime, the person he once was, is still kicking about in there. This is put on full display during Chiaki's death, when Izuru is confronted with something he cannot rationalize: his own tears. It seems I am not gay after all. You're about him with that. Even though you will not survive this, yeah. Even though you will not survive this. Sick clip, everyone. Clip that. Unlike a punch to the gut or a drug overdose, which don't affect him anyway, this moment shocks him. Oh, look at his little eyes widen in fear. Look at those evil gemstones. I can see the red flags reflecting in them. This is the first clear fracture in Izuru's detachment, and what a moment it was. Holy, this reaction exposes a critical flaw in the Kamakura project. While it can manufacture talent all it wants, it can never erase humanity. There's no talent for genuine emotion, no way to replicate lived experience. Hajime's feelings, his connections, his aspirations, his capacity to care never go away. Ironically, the dumb fuck steering committee would have been perfect lab rats for the project, given they were already devoid of humanity to begin with. So, Izuru in that sense is not a complete being. It's like they built this dark, mysterious alter ego cosplay for Hajime, slapped it on top of him, and expected that to override everything he used to be. Actually, yeah, that's literally what they did. But come on, right, they threw William Afton into a mascot suit, but he didn't suddenly become nice and friendly, did he? He's still a serial killer, suit or no suit. Anyway, Izuru's a mask slip, right? And rarely, the humanity beneath him resurfaces, reminding us that even the most perfect creation cannot fully suppress what it means to be human. But you know who is human? Okay, even I'll admit they're reaching at this point. Chiaki Nanami! Dude, you don't know how buzzing I am to discuss Chiaki again. It's been so long. Thank you, Despair Arc. It's the only good you ever did. Yeah, and this. Kamakura, Yas Queen. Kamakura, Yas Queen. Kamakura, Yas Queen. Dude, I actually have a problem with what's wrong. Chiaki in the anime closely mirrors her AI counterpart. Bloody hell, really? Colour me bemused. Bemused. She's endlessly loyal, cheerful, and stop beating around the bush. Fuck the bush. She's adorable. I love her so much. Video games are her safe space, whether through the escape they offer, the creative challenges they represent, or both. Her identity is just interwoven with being a gamer at this point, making her talent both a comfort and a defining aspect of who this little being is. Despite this, Chiaki struggles with self-doubt. She doesn't see herself as sociable or capable of making friends due to her talent. However, with the benevolent Chisa by her side, she begins to open up, taking steps to connect with others. This leads to shockingly positive results. Not to be a negative Nelly or anything, but I really didn't expect a room full of either loud or painfully lonely people with absolutely no in-between to suddenly accept Mario Kart as a valid conversation starter. But hey, beats me, I'm ignorant. Luckily for Chiaki, she manages to steer her class toward unity and joy. She does such a good job, in fact, that her peers even consider her for class president. If that isn't a testament to her abilities to inspire and bring others together, I don't know what is. Adding on to that, Chiaki's surprisingly perceptive, even wise sometimes, though unfortunately most of her wisdom stems from her insecurities. She's super self-aware, sounds like a clearance sale. She's able to recognize her strengths and faults and understand her role in this wacky world, yet it often stops there. When it comes to taking a step forward or brainstorming for solutions, Chiaki comes back empty-handed. She accepts reality, but can get confused when her emotions can't be resolved through video games alone, leading her towards shyness. She desires friendship and recognition, but without clear direction she struggles to act on these feelings. When guidance finally rolls on in through Hajime and her classmates, she moves decisively, directly into the danger. Now she knows exactly where to pour her energy. Chiaki's spin on the heel, dive into your chest joy when others show interest in her, especially Hajime. It's pure and unfiltered, and incredibly sweet. Now, you thought we were off the insecurities, but hell nah, no way we're not, because Chiaki's self-doubts are also tied to her talent. As the ultimate gamer, she can't help but feel boxed into having one singular purpose. Her first major dialogue is her lamenting on how the Reserve Corps students appear freer than the Ultimates to be more than the blank girl or the blank guy. While Hajime sees this as a major step forward and a beautiful realization moment, Chiaki just sits there, bathing in sloth, largely unaware of how significant that insight was. To me, I'd only assumed being a gamer started off as a hobby for her, as is the same with many of us. It was something private for her and her alone, only then did it snowball into this crazy huge thing she was crazy good at. As a result, she immerses herself in video games, RPGs, Minecraft, Tetris, oh shit. I mean, it's all she's known, sure, but it's her purpose too. Quite a heavy burden to handle, but gaming makes it all better for her. Even casually, from the park bench to the classroom desk, she's always button mashing. Over the course of Despair Arc, we see her take tentative steps forward, from playing alone to enjoying games with friends. However, when she sets her console aside, she struggles to define herself outside of gaming. Nothing else screams at me louder than when she puts her game down to express excitement to Hajime. She went from the most scream-bound, slow-mo wave imaginable to giving him her full attention. Oh, I'll see you tomorrow, 3. It's clear these moments are profoundly meaningful to her. Only when her softer, more vulnerable side is engaged, like when she fears losing Hajime, does she communicate directly with eye contact and sincerity. Worst part is, Hajime not showing up the next day it reinforces her retreat into gaming, as she questions whether her real-world attention might have pushed him away. Sadly, she buries herself in games once more in hopes of his return. Too bad that never happens.
Even armed.
But to tip the mood back up for a sec, I love how authentic Chiaki is. Like many of the other grounded talents in Danganronpa, she never tries to be anything more than herself. It's especially potent with her, seeing how she views her talent as just something that happened, a prison even. Because of this, she realised that there's no need to posture. All that's expected of her is to be talented. That's all the Academy asks of her. In a way, she ties her self-worth to being a gamer, which paradoxically frees her to be authentic in every other aspect of her life. She may resent that label, but it's a big factor into why she's not asked. As a result, she rarely puts on a filter. Time and time again, her emotions feel genuine and unforced. However, sometimes her deep connection to gaming can make her appear distant. She's so used to being absorbed in gameplay that she just locks in randomly, which can make her come across a little unemotional. A perfect example, calling back to that wave she gave Hajime in episode 1. The gesture is as sincere as anything. She acts because she cares, plain and simple. But to anyone else, I mean, you could see how you get confused there, right? She may look disinterested, but I'll bellow it from the megaphone because she deserves it, damn it! In reality, the opposite is true. When the console is down, when Hajime catches her off guard, or when she turns to speak to him, her authenticity becomes unmistakable. In those moments, she is as open and as genuine as anyone. The beauty of Chiaki is that, regardless of how she appears externally, she is always herself. With or without a screen, her core doesn't change, it simply expresses itself in different ways. To close with Chiaki's confidence, it's quiet but impactful enough to look into. Her confidence is rooted in how intent she is on not taking this world seriously at all. She understands she's way out of her depth, so she chooses to simply be herself. She's unapologetic about her likes and will headbutt you at the first sign of joy, and best of all, if she's bored, she will just leave you. She will sleep, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, she'd hardly be weird in this place. Hope's Peak is the academy for the weird, so in a world full of eccentric ultimates, you're hardly standing out. If anything, that chaos pushes her to let go even further. In many ways, Chiaki represents an ideal we all dream of, someone unafraid to be herself at all times. She can be loud without it being a performance, and quiet without stuttering an apology for being too awkward to speak. I guess I gave away too much there, but there's something deeply empowering about a character who fully acknowledges how strange her world is, yet remains grounded within it. That balance being authentic, inspiring and insecure, relatable, is what makes her so awesome. It's the double whammy of the century, the millennia, why not? Okay, now for the shadowy silhouette slowly inching closer to the screen. Right, I'll get them all out now. Junko fucking Anishima, the Despair Sisters, aka the ultimate despair. Yuri Kamakura, Yuri Kamakura, Yuri Kamakura, Yuri Kamakura. Junko Anishima is ready for an epic entrance. The smelly one, Mukuro Ikusaba. Kamakura, Yas Queen. Bro, I'm shit fucking gay. Junko in Despair arc feels a little different from how we see her in Danganronpa 1. Here she feels more animated. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. She looks like she's actually enjoying herself. There's a buoyancy to her presence, a sense of energy and engagement that contrasts with a more chaotic and erratic depiction in Trigger Happy Havoc. This version of Junko is far more active and involved down on the ground. She directly engages with those around her, teasing Mukuro, hacking at her with an ice pick as sisters do, manipulating Ryota, a healthy balance of eye gouging, and above all, invading everyone's personal space to intimidate and control while acting like her sister's the gross one. I mean, don't get me wrong, she is worse, but Junko's not as far behind as she thinks, I'll tell you that much. Rather than orchestrating from a distance through LARPing as her favourite persona, she immerses herself in the moment. This is what your parents mean when they tell you to put the phone down and live in the present. This is it, and it's beautiful. Understandably, that shift seems tied to the state of the world around her. In Despair Arc, this world is still vibrant, hopeful, and brimming with life. Rotten. This world is rotting. In response to that environment, Junko mirrors its energy, but in a good old Junko fashion, she twists it like a pretzel. Honestly, I won't be surprised if she's fantasized about doing that to someone. In fact, she probably has done it to someone. Mukuro would like to volunteer. She becomes more animated because she's over the moon by the sheer potential for despair within such a lively environment where there's more hope, there's more to destroy. Never change, Junko. The audience loves a good ominous sentence about despair. One more monologue coming right up for us, Junko. That's what she says every day. This creates a key distinction between her two portrayals. In Despair Arc, Junko's forward-looking, driven by ambition and curiosity, experimenting with different methods of spreading despair. In contrast, her Danganronpa 1 counterpart feels more static and self-contained, focused on her own internal fixation with despair and her eventual end. Here, she's still exploring, still discovering what form her despair will take. Exploring? Experimenting? Discovering? I didn't know despair could reflect the teenage experience so well. I guess Junko is a teenager as much as these games pretend she isn't. Freed from the weight of her eventual downfall, this younger Junko feels less burdened and more experimental. Her own morality is a foreign concept to her, but don't get it confused. She's very well acquainted with the concept of death, and she'll make it crystal clear as soon as she can. Junko here is so focused on the process, testing out different approaches like she's yamming up the Scoville scale on hot ones. I mean, you could totally just blow everything up. Ooh, what if you get in their heads instead, psychologically? But a little bit of torture never hurt anyone. Now give me your eye!
Never underestimate the power of the evil eye.
Each method reflects a different facet of her ever-evolving philosophy. Adding on to her freedom, Junko also feels more controlled in her use of personas. In the first game, she just rotates them around like it's nobody's business. Now, that definitely worked for the time. We absolutely needed that tonal whiplash to keep us on edge and teetering into despair, but I gotta admit, it's refreshing to see her control them a little bit. Even if she's stuck in the dumb blonde voice 90% of the time, I still appreciate it. Her dramatic voice comes across as playful. She's indulging in a bit of performance, while her analytical persona serves as a tool to detach herself when explaining bleak or horrific outcomes. This separation strips away sincerity, reinforcing her emotional distance. In Danganronpa 1, it came across insecure in a good way. She was so chaotic and all over the place, you could never place a finger on a single grounding force. Here, it's like she's deliberately role-playing as though she's constantly performing her own life. In that sense, Despair Arc's Junko feels like a precursor to Monokuma. You can see the foundation of that theatrical, sadistic personality forming, the blend of humor, detachment, and cruelty that we all know him to be. By contrast, her portrayal in Danganronpa 1 can feel overwhelming. That's putting it nicely. The constant shifting between numerous personas dilutes the impact of each one, particularly her analytical side, which becomes lost in the noise. In Despair Arc, the restraint makes her characterization sharper and more coherent. It also helps contrast Junko's personality with the reality of her work. The kind of things she's doing, they're so much more brutal and intimate than before. It feels wrong to have a jitter back and forth every 5 seconds. It'd undercut the harsh moments. By acting with deliberate intention and mindfulness, however, she creates a stark contrast, one that instills more despair than it does mindfuckery. In layman's terms, the Junko we know and love sought to break the characters entirely, to make them give up and succumb to despair, but this version of Junko wants the opposite. She wants them to endure, to continue, and to grow in a way that carries her influence beyond her own life. At this stage, she's building momentum, laying the groundwork for her legacy to flourish as she wishes. This context also explains why Junko appears genuinely annoyed in Danganronpa 2. Even as an AI replica, the one thing she, or the program representing her, truly cares about is continuation, ensuring her ideology ensures that her influence persists indefinitely. It does the whole despair, fun, awesome bit at the end, but I interpreted it more as the AI program replicating how it thought Junko would act in that scenario. But the reality of her concern is more existential. She is gone, and she cannot be confident that her remaining descendants, the newly redeemed remnants of despair, will carry forward as intended. Comparing the two now, I can see the difference. In her first inception, Junko knew the world was still in chaos. She had Monica Toa looking for an heir, the remnants backing her with instincts. She could afford to play around because there was no risk. She knew despair would continue even without her. Too bad half of her followers offed themselves afterwards, but she didn't know that was gonna happen. Anyway, what I'm saying is Despair Arc introduces us to a side of Junko that forces us to reassess how she's acted in the other titles. But I'm not done with her yet, because one thing we should never do as a collective audience, Junko Rules 101 over here, is understate this mad lady's intelligence. The last guy who did that, he is not here anymore. One thing Junko never gives up is concealing her ultimate analyst ability beneath a brash, air-headed persona. On the surface, she appears erratic or even foolish. One of those is actually true, guess which one? But this presentation is calculated. It encourages others to underestimate her, allowing her to operate unnoticed beneath that facade like the real gremlin she is. In reality, her intelligence is constantly on display, just masked by theatrics. Prime examples ensue. She dives for Izuru, knowing full well he won't retaliate, and she instantly analyzes Ryota's animation within seconds, masking it behind, ooh, quirky, cartoon villain eye movements. All this exaggeration and these heightened displays are essentially her chameleoning her way through her environment. As much as I hate to admit it, if anyone's truly 10 steps ahead in this franchise, it's probably her. Izuru's too bored to use his foresight to cause chaos, so if we're talking danger, nobody knows danger like Junko does. From one night stand to married couple, these two are inseparable. I'd argue everything this sicko does carries some form of intent, not in the way Ryota describes it. Yeah, sure buddy, those camera angles were totally inspiring hope, keep telling yourself that, pal. Even when her actions seem chaotic, there's an underlying structure guiding them, an invisible weight she's dragging with her like Sisyphus that nobody else gets to perceive. That is, if Sisyphus actually made any progress. While we can attempt to define her based on her outward behaviour, the truth is far less accessible. Junko is intentionally unknowable beneath the surface. Nevertheless, we can infer something brewing behind all the walls she puts up. The only thing consistent in Junko's life, and that's boredom. Izuru Kamakura, boredom. During her execution, for example, her reaction is not purely ecstatic. There's a moment of confusion, even flatness, as she questions why the final blow hasn't arrived. From what she reveals in the first game, Junko was always overshadowed by her sister. She was denied the kind of recognition and praise that defines worth in the eyes of others. Hell, she resents her own birth. It leaves her in a state of indifference. If she cannot attain what society defines as the highest highs of validation, recognition, and admiration, then the only way to go is down, to discover her own highs. Otherwise, she feels nothing. She feels worthless in a way that hurts in all the wrong ways. This dynamic explains her treatment of Mukuro. Junko frequently downplays her sister's achievements while simultaneously exerting control over her and demeaning her. On one hand, she resents Mukuro for embodying everything she believes she could never be. On the other, she values her for inadvertently guiding her toward despair, the one thing that gives her life meaning. In Junko's mind, Mukuro is both the cause of her emptiness and the reason she was able to fill it. By dragging Mukuro into despair alongside her, Junko is, in her own way, sharing the only form of fulfillment she understands. Back to the boredom, this suggests that her obsession with despair may not stem from ideology alone, but from a need to feel something, anything strong enough to break through that emptiness. Her constant performance reinforces this idea. Junko is always on, always shifting personas and dramatizing her existence. This suggests that despair to her is all about its intensity. Junko lives and breathes despair because it is the most extreme emotion she can experience. Ironically, this may be the simplest and most genuine aspect of her character. Everything else can be interpreted as performance, but her devotion to despair appears to be real. It's the foundation of every decision she makes, the one constant that defines her identity. Speaking of boredom, we can't just gloss over how fascinated she is with Izuru, can we? She recognizes in him the same emptiness she feels. Boredom, detachment, and a lack of direction. The difference is that Junko has found meaning within despair, while Izuru remains directionless. To her, he represents both a challenge and an opportunity. On one level, converting Izuru to despair would be a symbolic victory, wouldn't it? Corrupting the ultimate embodiment of hope. On the other, more personal level, it reflects her desire to give him purpose. If despair is the only thing that gives her life meaning, then sharing it becomes, in her mind, an act of connection. This reframes her cruelty in a disturbing way. Not much, but enough. Junko's love language is despair. She shares it with others because she believes it's the most profound experience one can have. To her, those who are stagnant or directionless, like Izuru or Mitarai, are wasting their potential. By pulling them into despair, she offers them the same catharsis she relies on. In that sense, Junko genuinely believes despair to be meaningful. But hey, there's a whole conversation about Junko and that later on, so I'll save the despair talk for then. But for now, damn it, is she the most kick-ass, cartoon-ass villain ever, and I adore her. Though, another thing I adore is moving on to the next section of the video, of course. Chapter 3 is all about the plot. We're going over key themes, analysing the depths of ideology and sneaky writing choices, not to mention a dive into one of the most atrocious character assassinations since Wreck-It Goddamn Ralph. I'll never forgive that, you know. Anywho, I'll think of a cool quote here to end the chapter on. He who Dangans... Wait, no, where are you going? Oh, he who Dangans gets a run... Oh, come on! Okay, this is where I get the most excited, so bear with. Right, okay, I'm ready, let's go. I see no better place to start than with the backbone of Despair Arc herself, Chisa Yukizome. A pretty unknown fact about Chisa if you weren't aware, she's the protagonist. Actually, with how many characters are in this show, that's probably not too well known, is it? Regardless, placing her at the center of the story is an interesting concept, and the more the show explores it, the more it makes sense to throw a brand spanking new character in the middle of it all. We get to watch someone become acquainted with the characters we already know and love, which is already a red... it's the red flag again. It's a tough thing to pull off, but to be fair, it creates a smoother transition for the viewers as we see Chisa grow to love them just as we have. It makes her increasingly relatable. As I mentioned a bit ago, her mannerisms and authenticity make her easier to connect with. Bundle that with her smiley face and how she kills the world with kindness. And let's just say despair's not the only thing we're hypnotized by. The story doesn't frame her as some big, bad, trying too hard to the point it pisses us off. Instead, she acts as the force that brings everyone together, much how we, the players, rounded up the cast in Danganronpa 2 through the free time events. Bouncing off of that, because Despair Arc is an anime, the player-driven instigation we're used to is stripped away, and thus, it must be somewhat replicated. Thankfully, Chisa embodies that role for us. She's the one who goes out of her way to interact with every colourful character in the cast, and if that doesn't remind you of your jittery teenage self fawning over everyone in the original game, you missed out, mate. My heart bleeds for you, bro, because talking to Gundam for the first time awakened something in people. Not experiencing that feels like missing out on a whole nother life. Anywho, Chisa's optimism closely reflects the mindset many of us had when we first went through it all. Placing a character like this at the center of the story, one who brings familiar player-like interaction to the screen, helps the anime retain its identity as a Danganronpa experience. Much of the show's immersion depends on its protagonist living up to that role. Sure, they could have had Chiaki or Nagito as the protagonist, but how weird would that be, man? It's tough to fully step into the perspective of characters we're already used to looking at from the outside. A new character, however, allows us to project ourselves more naturally into her position. While Chisa's far from the self-insert Makoto or Hajime is, she 100% reflects the player through her writing and direction, managing to strike that balance between being her own character and a bridge for the audience is what makes her such a good and damn effective protagonist. To expand on this structurally, see I'm using big words now, because you've got to tie it back somehow, Despair Arc goes out of its way to make the cast naturally distant. They're still as explosive as normal, which keeps them consistent and familiar to us, though they tend to be more isolated. First up, the characterization prevents us being alienated and lays a solid groundwork, which is a great starting point. At the same time though, it allows them to be gradually united by Chisa's influence. It's a great way to hammer home Chisa's purpose. She's allowed to feel like this missing puzzle piece character without interfering too much with their personalities, if that makes sense. This way, we feel less skeptical of her. In fact, we're even inclined to like her. These choices make Chisa's inclusion feel far more deliberate and concrete, which is what makes her such a reliable anchor for this chaotic story. I mean, if the world around her refuses to shut its face and behave somewhat predictably, having something we can ground ourselves in becomes essential. It gives everything a warm, almost homely feeling. We can see reflections of ourselves in Chisa, even without the direct control we're used to. Because of that, Chisa becomes so lovable, right up there with the rest of Class 77B, which says a lot considering they had a 50-hour head start. Amazing foundation for the absolute whiplash that is this story, like the steel beams holding up a roller coaster. Now, onto something that, by goodness, has never left the screen this entire video. Every clip I've shown so far holds remnants of this, and
Chica in a Shima is ready for her epic entrance!
and that's light. More importantly, the descent of it. Despair Arc begins with brightness and gradually descends into darkness as the episodes progress, and as Junko continues jabbing a spoon in my eye socket. Come to think of it, this show would be a great torture method. In episode 1, the lighting is vibrant and colourful, but by episode 11, the world has shifted from positivity to oh my god, holy shit. Immediately that shift works in tandem with the one presented in Future Arc, which starts off muted and dull and gradually moves toward the light. The entire reason these two arcs exist and why the writers chose to adopt this alternating episode structure is because they're both united by a single, continuous story. Despair Arc thrusts the world into darkness, Future Arc picks up from there, grabs the world by the ear and drags it back into the light. Something this arc made me realise is that, in essence, this is the timeline of Danganronpa, just not how you think it is. The killing games, by design, take place within closed environments. Danganronpa 1 starts once we're inside and ends when we escape. The same is true for Danganronpa 2. We begin in the classroom and end in the trial room. At no point do we truly witness the outside world firsthand. Instead, we're told about it. In Trigger Happy Havoc, Junko, alongside the mentally unstable ultimate murderous fiend, informs us of what the hell's happening outside. But when we move into Goodbye Despair, the torch is passed to Makoto, Kyoko, and Byakuya, who share it with our second cast. It's always word of mouth. V3 even plays with this idea, jingling keys before our eyes. Ooh, maybe there's an outside world. You want to see it? Here it is. Never mind, I'm a liar. Hydraulic press. It maintains that same distance because Danganronpa as a series is deeply aware that the script doesn't finish. I didn't finish this bit. Wait, what? You know what I'm trying to say though, right? It's aware that this is how the series is. Oh god. It maintains that same distance because Danganronpa as a series is deeply aware that ambiguity is key and containment is despair. See? Good one, finished it, brought it back. This is what makes the anime so significant. Despair Arc and Future Arc are the only entries, excluding spin-offs, that fully commit to showing the outside world as their primary setting. Because of that, it makes this anime a continuous story with the implication of what happened between. Viewing it solely from an outside perspective, these arcs represent the real progression of the world itself. The events of the game still occur, but they're isolated incidents, contained, almost detached from the broader global narrative. In contrast, the anime presents a world in motion, its collapse, its aftermath, and its attempted recovery. A clear story. Through that, we realise these stories are more connected than we originally realised. It goes leagues beyond just the lighting, viewers, but still not done with that. Within Despair Arc itself, the initial cheery woohoo I'm blind, it's so bright! Lighting exists to lull us into a small exists to lull us into a false sense of security. As I mentioned before, Hope's Peak at the time had a few skeletons in its closet. I guess it still does if you think about it. Poor Jin. The lighting is a reflection of that, an institution that concealed its corruption behind a cheerful, polished exterior. The use of colour grounds the story in that illusion, making it feel as if the world itself begins to unravel as the truth is revealed throughout the narrative. This is a bit of subliminal messaging, yeah, Junko loves a bit of that, doesn't she? When Ryota talks about the perfect angle and framing that inspires hope, that's exactly what this anime itself does. He was right. Frickin' Ryota was right. It uses lighting and framing to mimic the key developments in the story. You're telling me, alongside the corny humour, character annihilation, and oh look, it's a woman on screen, time to zoom in 50 times, it's meta about its own deception? Meta. This approach makes the eventual tragedy far more impactful, as it builds subtly beneath the surface before fully emerging. On top of that, these sneaky little techniques mark a bit of a shift in Danganronpa, Kodaka doing things a little differently. Lucky him, as the series has never relied on, or I guess more accurately, been able to rely on environmental storytelling. For the longest time, the settings were just these static pieces. Simply put, the first game served as containment to keep them enclosed and in prime condition for optimal despair. In the second game, that deceptively constant blue sky of Jabberwock Island was meant to contrast the despair and bloodshed going on below. In Despair Arc, however, the environment is free to evolve alongside the narrative. The world itself becomes a reflection of despair, as it doesn't act as an enhancer. Despair will occur regardless. It's Junko's master plan and life purpose. If she gives up simply because the sky doesn't comply, it'd go against fate. We feel locked into a new perspective as consequence, a twist on how the environment has never acted as an entity. I love it. To add on to that, because of how endy-wildy this premise is, the world kinda needs to respond to it. It fully conveys the weight of despair and how catastrophic the tragedy is, purely by how much of an impact it makes to even the most fundamental forces. It feels real, damn it! Now, I did do a bit of an oopsie here and probably leave out the most important foil to this argument. Well, actually, I did it deliberately so it'd hit harder. By the end of Despair Arc, the sky is bright again. By the time the Reserve Corps students begin their uprising and jump from the building, the sky burns a vivid crimson and the world is engulfed in flames, new flames, strikingly clear, almost surreal. This imagery reinforces the unsettling idea that despair can be just as visually captivating as hope. It fills the world with intensity and colour, demanding attention, yet unlike hope, it leaves destruction in its wake. Ring ring, oh, it's Future Arc on the phone. Yeah, what's that? Another parallel? yeah, beep. Now, while Despair Arc leaves the world burning almost beautifully like a fireworks show, Future Arc picks up in the aftermath, the smoke once the flame's been snuffed out. Man, I am just killing it with these metaphors today. My similes too, and my comedic timing. Alright, maybe not that. Ultimately, the use of lighting and colour in Despair Arc tells its story in a way the other entries couldn't due to their more confined settings. Here, the environment feels like a living thing, in a way that fits the new flame, the thing I just mentioned, this theme the anime circles. And in many ways, they reflect Junko herself. She's more active, bubbly, and inspired and full of life than what we know her to be. The final scenes being a massive clash of hope and despair fulfilling Junko's wildest dreams, and the sky bleeding to reflect that almost absurdly. It captures Junko so wonderfully. Big fan of that for sure, but you know what, I'ma keep chugging along on this Junko train for a bit. Let's open the Pandora's box, this idea I came up with all the way back when the Danganronpa 2 video came out, and I've been itching to talk about it again. Let's discuss Junko's ideology, shall we? For a long time, I dismissed Junko's craving for despair as just that. Despair for despair's sake. To me, there was no depth to her other than cartoon villain. I'm gonna rectify that today. I went along the whole roster, ignoring relationships, depth, and hell, even practicality. It just doesn't make sense that the top dog, the one who molded a plan out of seemingly nothing other than sheer will and natural ability, would do so simply because she likes it. In reality, Junko appears to genuinely care about many people, though, a big though right here, it's not in the way we describe it, nor is it displayed in any visible way, deeply obscured by the persona she presents. Now, first thing on the agenda is to define despair in Junko's eyes. To her, it is the single most intense emotion a person can experience. Unfortunately, we're not all huge fans of torturing ourselves and others for leisure. Unless you count, like, the smelly one, Mukuro Ikusa. So, despair is framed negatively. The narrative frames her as morally evil, which is accurate, yeah, no ifs or buts there, but is it complete? No, it's not complete. There's a layer of nuance beneath that surface which clarifies her motivations. In Junko's mind, despair is her salvation, and as she says herself, she carries that forward by considering herself salvation. From that, we can infer that Junko feels somewhat compelled to share despair because it acts as a positive force from her POV. Take Mukuro for example. Junko repeatedly abuses her, subjects her to ongoing emotional and psychological torment to the point it becomes ingrained in Mukuro's mind. Yet, after a while, surely that gets boring, no? What benefit is there to Junko doing the same old kick her over and call her smelly act every 5 minutes? I could list 10 activities right now that induce despair like no tomorrow. Like watching one of my videos. Seeing Junko continue to demean Mukuro despite it having no real benefit to her, in fact, she looks lazy half the time, only makes me assume there's deeper meaning there. And there is. Take the words right from the devil's mouth. Only despair's unpredictability can save you from a boring future. That right there. Junko views despair as something dynamic and transformative. If she fully believes in that idea, then the depth, intimacy and personalization of the despair she inflicts becomes significant. The more profound the despair is, the greater its value. And I'll tell you who is great value despair. Junko Hanashima is! Mukuro receives a healthy dose of despair over years until it finally becomes a baseline, a new hormone within her mind that's constantly being stimulated. Then, when she's finally put out of her misery, she's killed quickly, with only enough time to realize what happened, realize she failed, realize she was betrayed. 1, 2, 3, done. There's no greater despair than betraying your own sister. For Mukuro, there's no greater despair than being tortured forever, then being killed in an instant, as if you don't even matter, by your own sister. On both sides, there's despair, and come on, the entire situation screams extra. She does too much, and plans it too deeply so despair is maximized on both sides. I could pull up more examples, and I will, right? Despair Art presents 3 key scenarios. The sharp bloodshed left to their own devices, that's the student council. A loose end never led on, that's Juzo. The one she drops when they're no longer of use to her, that's Ryota. In these cases, Junko facilitates despair but doesn't immerse herself in it. These individuals are tools, means to an end within her larger plan. They experience despair, but Junko remains emotionally detached. In contrast, the people she engages with personally, those she understands, spends time with and forms connections with, are the ones she subjects to the most carefully crafted despair. These are the individuals who matter to her. Class 78 are prime examples of this. Junko locked up her own class, her friends, those she didn't outright manipulate, smiled with, she preserved them in her own version of hell, forcing them into a killing game while stripping away their memories. The result is a scenario where they destroy one another without understanding why. For Junko, this hits her like a truck of despair because she knows them, their suffering resonates with her. their despair becomes her own. In that sense, I'm confident in saying that despair is Junko's love language, her reason for living and her reason for dying. The way she creates and distributes despair reflects the value she places on others, evident by those she waves away, the tools, and those she targets intimately, the ones she holds closest. I'm just so glad to get that mind dump out. All I've ever wanted to do since the first Danganronpa video was sink my teeth into this topic some more. Junko deserves so much more than a single dimension to play on. Imagine how much chaos she can cause when we see her in 3D. That was a joke because of the two-dimensional, as in flat and boring.
Chica in a shimmer is ready for her.
Don't get high on your own supply is the statement for anyone dealing with illicit substances. Yes, this is relevant. There's no ifs or buts about whether that drivel you're selling is good for people. It isn't. Hence, you take the refined stuff. Oh, fuck it, not at all. It's all about money, money, money. That's your drug. I bring this up because Junko, despite the harrowing nature of despair, never refuses it herself. This ties directly into her perception of despair as purely positive. For instance, and here's Exhibit A for why I decided to include this in the video, upon reviewing Ryota's despair video, Junko refuses to look away. Come to think of it, this nutjob gets closer, analysing it up, down and sideways to seep as much despair as she can from it. This moment is crucial to the narrative, no duh. It signals that Junko genuinely believes in her own righteousness. She knows all too well that despair doesn't feel good or pleasant by conventional normie human standards, yet she understands its intensity for herself and wishes to extend that experience to the world. For the audience, this moment hits us because it complicates our own judgment of Junko. She's still as evil as people who leave crumbs in the tub of butter, but the scene highlights that her existence is not solely self-serving. She willingly subjects herself to the same forces she uses to manipulate others, because she truly believes in the transformative power of despair. You know, I've not done this for a while. I might do a little bit of a different one. Despair! I love the idea of this, especially from a structural standpoint. Of course, I do. It allows viewers to question their assumptions and introduces nuance beneath the surface, which, sorry if I've not mentioned it as of yet, but that's Despair Arc's whole core theme. The entire point of this show is to introduce nuance to what we already thought we knew. The ultimate despair in Danganronpa 2 seemed monstrously evil. They still are, but womb stealing aside, they're revealed as victims of circumstance. Hope's Peak initially appears pristine, unfortunately wrapped in Junko's villainy. But its corruption slowly comes to light, alongside the genuine hearts of its students. Similarly, Junko is not merely a sadistic murderer, she experiences and relishes despair herself, framing it as the ultimate purpose. This characterization is why Despair Arc feels so pivotal, why so many people whinge over it, and how it changed their impression of the characters by inviting backstory. It challenges viewers to reconsider morality, agency, and the nature of Junko's ideology. By that point, she's gone from a villain who gets a little too close for comfort with a concept into a figure whose philosophy is as terrifying as it is really interesting, I can't lie. What's also super interesting, I can't lie, is another general theme of Despair Arc, and that's this whole hypnosis as despair angle. Hypnosis! Controversial as it is. Controversial as it is, there's some analysing to do, so shut your face. On one hand, I do get why some people might be outraged by this. It can come across cheap, absolutely. I mean, Junko's been built up as this 4D chess master manipulator ass archetype capable of orchestrating global ruin. Global ruin. That line was perfect, so I said global ruin. Global ruin, so it feels like there should be more to the story. More spectacle, more giant, overarching cat and mouse dominoes falling into place satisfaction. Well, this isn't a shonen, but I get it, Gundam's confused too. On the other hand though, cut him some slack. Like, lay off the armchair, you're sinking into it, you've been sat there so long blabbering. The execution works well enough, and the way Despair Arc frames Junko's rise through hypnosis aligns perfectly with the themes of Danganronpa. I never said it was good, only decent, satisfactory, in line with the themes. Anyway, let's get on with it then. Hypnosis reframes the tragedy as an actual tragedy. Victims become just that, victims on both sides, while Junko stands alone as the originator. Poor kids on the receiving end of metal pipes and knives didn't ask for this. Neither did the ones forced to comply and swing the damn thing. This shifts the narrative focus away from the moral failings of the characters and onto the sheer tragedy of the situation. The collapse becomes triumphant, not for any individual but for despair itself, while real people struggle against forces beyond their control, observed by Junko from afar with a bag of popcorn wrapped in her sister's pheromones. Through choosing hypnosis as the catalyst, despair is framed as a pure human vulnerability, a sleeper agent within anyone, capable of being artificially amplified to push people against their nature. That shit's scary, man. Even worse is how terrifying that despair is, yet pitiable at the same time. The existential weight comes from knowing that no one is truly safe. Anyone can succumb to despair if the right stimuli are applied. In that sense, the earlier episodes, as we slowly see that domino effect lined up, make perfect sense. As soon as that video claims its first victim, right, pack up now, it's over. There's a heart drop, truly. My heart's already in its coffin, getting comfy as well. As soon as the antagonist becomes nature itself, that's some dangerous stuff. It's a chilling realization that if it's happening today, it can happen tomorrow, to anyone. Not only that, but hypnosis also emphasizes the simplicity of how human fragility can be exploited. There's no need for intimate individual manipulation when the devil's in the details. The details of biology itself. Exploit those cracks, and you've won the world, you wonderful moron! It's a straightforward method and almost underwhelming. Like, yeah, that's it, it's that simple. Is that not how it works though? We're expecting this huge clash of sides and internal philosophy, but instead we get cold truth. That to create the battle we've all been envisioning, that Junko's been envisioning, you have to make compromises that ultimately undersell your own natural ability. That's why Junko feels so underutilized, to hammer that message home. Also, doesn't hypnosis just kick us in the face? Like, hope and despair in the Danganronpa series are no laughing matter. They're treated as these huge titans at the beginning and end of everything, pure natural forces emerging and fading through individuals based on their experiences and environments. Yet, showing despair can just be made, artificially pumped into people. Junko demonstrates that what was once considered this untouchable natural balance can indeed be manipulated by people and turned against others. You hear that? A lowly human being can create an omnipresent concept through sheer craft. Actual Breath of the Wild boss battle, bro. Find the weak points and the world's your oyster. Through this, despair becomes even more twisted in how it inverts hope. Despair is inherent, it exists within all of us and can be intensified or triggered by external forces. Hope, by contrast, is fragile and must be inspired. It cannot be manufactured. It must arise naturally, either from oneself or from another living, hopeful individual. Makoto's, Hajime's, Kamaru's realizations that hope must prevail and that those around them can be uplifted by it underscores this difference. The idea of hypnosis only makes this stronger. Artificial despair works just as destructively as it normally does. By contrast, artificial hope, as shown in Future Arc through Ryota's Hope video, doesn't work. It's just this cold, sterile complacence with no soul or meaning behind it. Hope must be grown organically. The deliberate contrast between artificial despair and failed artificial hope emphasizes the intrinsic value and purity of hope. The series makes hope feel even more precious, reinforcing the central message. Hope, when genuine, can overcome despair, but only when it is real and self-sustaining. Moving past that, hypnosis also makes Junko lonely, right? Everyone around her is either forced, manipulated, or indifferent. Ultimately, nobody desires despair except her. This makes Junko less of a mastermind. All she truly embodies is an opportunist, clawing at the chance to play for her wildest dreams. She's not really bothered about the method at all, at least compared to how much we are, because her eyes are fixated on one thing. I don't have to tell you about that, but by everything I will, despair! 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 In Danganronpa 1, Junko is celebrated as the ultimate mastermind. Everyone's girl boss, Discord profile picture, instant 10 million view cosplay TikTok. I actually said a sentence then, but there's so many buzzwords involved, it actually just doesn't make any sense. But Despair Arc reveals that as much as her genius knows no bounds, it's controlled. Why build a bomb when you can just buy one off the black market that's 10 times more powerful? If it were about ego, the answer would be my reputation. But if the goal were to blow shit up, the answer would be, there's no answer, let's do this. That's what separates Junko from simply ignoring efforts. In all honesty, the reason her ideology gains weight is because her intent, the psychology behind causing despair, is more important than the tangible mechanics. In summary, it's easily the most compelling theme in the show for me. The story switching its gears to focus on the human psyche and seeing minds break under their autonomy being overridden makes for such a darker, grounded undercurrent that contrasts with the ambitious storyline. The real horror is in the understanding that despair can be triggered so easily, almost impersonally. What a big, fat smack across the face of existential dread this is, only amplified by the reality that the threat lacks a tangible face. It is the universal abstract concept that exists everywhere all at once. And you know I love a good psychological horror, I'll never complain about that. Right, next up is the contrast between artificial and genuine manipulation. Yeah, we're keeping the real versus fake angle up here, but you can never get too much of that, can you? Between the classic face-to-face deception and the good old anime power fantasy bullshit and the selective, slimy twisting of the amp of instincts. Throughout the arc, intimacy is used as a tool to control on an individual level. Junko convinces Ryota that he's working toward a greater good. She's relying on her deception and her crafted persona, a broken, cartoonish figure who aims to inspire hope just as much as Ryota does. Ryota, the dumbass, believes it's because I'm sad and nobody loves me, and Junko wins, showing off her ultimate analyst ability with how she picked the right person to mess with and knew exactly how to approach it to twist the situation to her needs. These interactions teach us that despite Junko being the architect of Armageddon, it always begins with personal human connections. They reveal Junko's cunning ability to manipulate others, coaxing them into adopting her worldview, yet her focus on the larger objective means that these intimate manipulations fizzle out the moment their purpose runs dry. Artificial manipulation, in turn, is all about devaluation. On a grand scale, the individual people seem to matter less and less. Despite her craziness and surprising persistence with getting what she wants, Junko can't be there all the time to witness every personal horror that unfolds within her apocalypse. Sure, if she passed by it on the street, she'd probably stop to ogle and egg them on, but let's be honest with ourselves, that ain't happening often, especially since she went the shut-in route. Regardless, the system she built is vast and impersonal, yet the intent behind it remains unwavering. You can argue the less involved Junko is, the less impactful her regime, and the more automated it feels. Yet, the ideology she instills is genuine. That's the part that matters. We always end up back here, don't we? Future Arc, which feels cold, dull, and mechanical, is a story about constructing hope artificially. That plot fails to capture the vitality and soul inherent in genuine experiences. By contrast, Despair Arc emphasizes that artificiality does not eliminate the impact of a soul. As long as the intent behind an action is genuine, whether it leans toward good or evil, it carries emotional weight regardless of scale. The potency of the soul scales proportionally with the movement, creating an effect that is felt deeply, whether in intimate deception or in the mass manipulation of despair. Now, I'm a bit annoyed, so bear with me. Fan service, please. No, fan service. No, fan service in Despair Arc especially. It reaches hellish levels here, bro. Oh, but right, I'm gonna run it through for you, particularly with Mikan, because unfortunately she's objectified the most, which is unfortunate. Right, I get it. She fell over in Danganronpa 2 one too many times, and I discussed that vaguely in the original video, but that's not cool, you know? It's uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't happen for any other reason than leaving the viewer horned up, which is the cheapest way of eliciting a reaction since Negiri. I mean, you have filler, right? It exists, but it's usually some funny, authentic, happy moment that earns its reaction from the viewer, but fan service doesn't do that. It just objectifies characters, sets a bad precedent overall, and digs the grave of anime even even deeper by reinforcing the stereotype. Not a great watch, I'll be honest. Anyway, Mikan is just fall over girl here basically. Her role as a healer, her genuine desire to help and care for others. What's that? Never mind, just angle the camera 6 feet up her ass, that'll work. Instead of making her interesting, she is repeatedly presented in situations designed solely to elicit voyeuristic humour, or go, look how vulnerable she is, in somehow the most objectifying way that breaks 15 clauses in the Geneva Convention. Listen, I brought examples here too, I'm not messing around. Mikan absolutely could have been written with more nuance. For example, when helping Ryota, a natural approach would have been to show her struggling to process the truth as you do, looking back and forth between the two Ryotas in confusion, grappling with the ultimate imposter's revelation, and ultimately feeling conflicted about the responsibility and trust placed in her. That would maintain her nervous, self-conscious and emotional traits while keeping her role meaningful. Instead, I don't know, she's reduced to fawning over showing her gratitude and, simply put, lusting over the ultimate imposter's beer belly. No duh, it completely undermines her character and leaves a sour impression, nothing new there. What sucks is just how pivotal Mikan is to the story. I mean, she is the first person to witness the despair video, its first victim. That's quite a bigger deal than we're giving it credit for. It would have been such a cool concept to emphasize the idea of normalcy, whatever that means at Hope's Peak, you know? Having Mikan be the one who constantly tries to fit in, caught in extraordinary circumstances and totally out of her depth. You could get great character moments and humour out of that without compromising who she is. Instead, we get this. Oh, don't get me started on that scene in episode 2, bro. No, Hiyoko, you can't just drug everyone with aphrodisiacs. Seriously, the downright disgusting nature of this framing here isn't great. Like, Teruteru's a pervert, but now he's an actual rapist, and suddenly it feels like the writers want to tell us something, having all their teenage characters get horny in a room together. It made me incredibly uncomfortable, like, all of this was so unnecessary. I'll give it this, there is one moment I found mildly funny, you know, it's not all bad. Kazuichi being held back by Fuyuhiko, that works, you know? Fuyuhiko having the willpower to resist even the strongest hormones, while Kazuichi folds like an origami in seconds, that makes sense, right? That's good, even. But that only works because nothing actually happens, right? The second you think about what could have happened if Fuyuhiko wasn't there to stop him, the whole thing falls apart again. It doesn't help that characters like Ibuki and Gundam are just totally deleted in the process. Ibuki's always prioritised being band members and chilling together over romance, and now she's blabbering on about sexy fire nonsense. Like, dude, shut the fuck up. That's so out of character for her. Gundam gets it even worse because now he's just a massive wanker who can't contain himself. Everyone just becomes wasted caricatures of sexual desire, and I despise it, right? They actively detract from the richness of the cast and waste runtime for the sake of perking the audience up. You have a limited runtime, you know. You could have used this for more wholesome scenes, but whatever. I'm just so fed up of Danganronpa taking these teenage characters and turning them into some voyeuristic fantasy every 5 seconds. Can we stop this? It's just so terribly timed and hardly a joke. The whole thing is just teenagers being frisky, which is wrong on so many levels. Anyway, I'll move on for that for a second, but keeping in the vein of fan service, there's actually a moment in the story that I actually think pulls it off pretty well. Now, that sentence usually never has anything good come after it, but trust me, oh, fuck off. When Chisa is brainwashed, the camera focuses on close-ups of her body as she writhes in pain. However, it never feels sexually framed, not in Impact at least. Instead, it reads as a visceral representation of her suffering. To run through it a bit, the scene begins conventionally. Ooh, feet trembling, boom, eyes pried open by that thing from Clockwork Orange as she's force-fed the despair video. What? Bam! Glimpses of her mouth and wrists, yada yada yada, keep on rolling. These fragmented shots emphasize the physical and psychological strain without relying on explicit imagery. We could have had that guy chopping his head off earlier, but with Chisa instead, yet it deliberately shows us the impact rather than the thing. Gore is the word, I'm talking about gore, brains, Plants vs Zombies. That ambiguity makes the moment more disturbing, as the focus remains on Chisa as a person enduring something horrific. Great first bit, very, very well done, thumbs up, then the framing shifts, yeah? The camera lingers briefly on areas typically associated with fan service, her pelvis where her tights meet her uniform, and her chest as her back arches under the strain. On paper, these are familiar loaded angles, emphasis on loaded, you fucking pervert. Yet here they don't function in the same way, and that's why I give it the pass. Very loosely, I'm still not too sure about it, but still. In a way, it subverts expectation. The visual language resembles fan service, but the context strips it of any sexual connotation. Nothing about Chisa struggling in pain matches with what the framing feels like it's trying to force. It feels violating purely because it should be. It feels uncomfortable in a different way, like the camera is forcing itself where it shouldn't, trying to find some weird way to sensationalize this trauma as Junko does. Best part about it is Chisa was never sexualized up to this point. Even in that god-awful drugging scene, she remained the responsible adult, a testament to her character for sure. As a result, when the camera adopts this kind of framing, it feels misplaced, almost wrong. Like, don't treat Chisa like that, she doesn't belong there. The audience recognizes the visual cues, but rejects their usual meaning, creating a powerful sense of unease that actually feels deliberate. I mean, her body language reeks of this with the arched back and the exposed posture. It might resemble sexualized imagery in other contexts, like apparently when Mikan slips on a banana peel or whatever, but they're all clearly a response to the unbearable pain and helplessness she's being put through. It's such a strong example of how you can take a trope and flip it on its head to have real meaning. The power lies in the implication. These visuals could be sexualized, but the narrative refuses to let that happen. If Despair Arc just decided to run with this some more and make us uncomfortable without making us disgusted or personally violated, it'd be such a more likable show. Like using that sexualization to tell a completely different story as we see here, or even to empower people. Unfortunately, the reason these moments actually stand out so much is purely a product of how little the rest of the series decides to go down this experimental route. Definitely sucks, but washing away that train wreck, another thing Despair Arc slaps bare ass onto our screens is the relentless mistreatment of the reserve course. Oh yeah? You didn't expect bare ass and reserve course in the same sentence, did you? Ha ha! Ha ha! Ha! Hajime Hinata? Throughout Despair Arc, the reserve course are treated like shit. The higher-ups constantly push this narrative of them being inferior, valuing them as assets over people, and all around being giant fucking losers. It reinforces that theme of classism I mentioned earlier. It presents both perspectives, the elite and the ordinary. For the ordinary, that being shorthand for giant money funnel, aka the reserve course, we're shown their discrimination in different ways. There's the open, on-screen discrimination, a certain boxer curb-stomping Hajime might come to mind here, but there's also the subtler stuff, like how the reserve course building is completely desaturated and devoid of life compared to the main course, or how they're forced to wear uniforms, stripping them of individuality. Hope's Peak bears more of a resemblance to a utopia story than you might think. It sells the illusion of an ideal environment, only to reveal the discrimination embedded at its core. In doing so, the narrative lifts the veil on the academy and challenges what the audience believes it understands. The tone becomes more grounded as Hope's Peak, once perceived as an untouchable paradise, begins to feel real and flawed. Once again, utopia, a world that appears vibrant and aspirational, like somewhere you wanna be, yet ultimately reflects the same social inequalities found in reality. Not only that, but this dynamic does a little whoosh, switcheroo. I thought that'd be a cool thing to do. It subverts the established idea of what talent is in Danganronpa. For ages and ages, we've been told that talent is an inherent ability, something that exists to inspire hope and improve the world. But why, oh why would it ever be that simple, let alone virtuous? I mean, get a hold of yourself. Hope's Peak, in a traditional Hope's Peak fashion, distorts this concept entirely. Talent becomes commodified like currency, and those who lack it are aptly devalued. Or, poor. This reveals just how far the institution has strayed from what the original Kamakura wanted. While the reserve course is framed as an opportunity to reach the elite, it ultimately reinforces the belief that talent determines worth. No matter how much people try and bridge that gap, whether through Hajime storming his sassy attitude onto the gates, or genuine friendships and relationships formed by Mahiru and Fuyuhiko for example, an undercurrent of prejudice remains. Though that's all thrown in the bin when you see how the people, the actual actual individuals within this mess react to that framework. Those in the main course don't want to discriminate, full stop. On the other side, the reserve course doesn't want to shove the talented students onto a pedestal and worship them as gods or whatever. That showcases the human impact this system has, and how these kids are as innocent as they are talented. Yet, sadly, the structure of Hope's Peak enforces these roles, imposing some artificial hierarchy and forcing the students to submit to it. But what does this mean for the Academy itself? Well, through maintaining this divide, it keeps itself relevant, believe it or not. It positions itself as the sole gateway to hope, encouraging reserve corps submissions by making talent seem both essential and unattainable. The greater the distance between the two groups, the more desirable that hope becomes, and the more cash they can stuff into their pockets. But it does not end there, as the reserve corps' eventual rebellion leads us to our next point, as it highlights the mindset behind the brainwash. One thing in particular I noticed when Class 77B were doing their whole "I'll make the world a better place" spiel is just how little their core desires seem to change. From their own words, they still wanted to pursue their dreams. In fact, their ambitions become even stronger. In a warped sense, they feel more driven to make a difference. However, despite this seemingly positive language, their actions lead to the world crumbling. Not good. They become the world's most wanted terrorists, enemy number frickin' 1, yet they still believe in the same underlying goals. But the difference arises when you change a what to a how. Anyone who studied their 5 W's and a H in primary school will recognise this. It's the difference between what they pursue and how they perceive it. The answer to that being the lens of despair, of course. This ties back to how despair erodes rational thought. That line took so long to say, I was saying national thought the whole time. Rational. What? Rational! Consequences are chucked out of the window in pursuit of compelling its subjects to go do it. Reach your goals, but reach them in the most extreme ways possible. Asterisk, everybody. I don't know why I'm just shouting out random words. I think there's something going on today. I've got the flu. This distorts the means by which they achieve their objectives, as their desires are completely redirected, pushing them toward outcomes rooted in suffering. Now that's pretty twisted, isn't it? But I didn't ask that, did I? Or rather, I did, but I meant it gets worse. Because if we look back at the moment of brainwashing, we see a clear contrast between now and then. During the brainwashing process, they resist it. They don't want that shit. They beg for it to stop. Yet once it fully takes hold, that resistance vanishes, replaced by an almost euphoric sense of purpose. They appear energized, unified, and completely aligned. Does that really sound like their values anymore? Do you really think they wanted to go solving world hunger right after that? Now that's an actual question, and the answer is a hard no. Otherwise, you need checking out. But it grinds my gears just how much closer they seem, though. They don't argue or disagree or shove meat in each other's mouths. Hold up. What did you just say? In fact, they're all pretty chill, even encouraging one another. That's not the Class 77B I know. Where's the knives? Where's the I'll batter your best friend because she killed my sister? Where's Terry's Falcon Punch and subsequent schmoozing? It's all so dull, man. They don't love each other. Mwah, mwah, mwah. All they are is conditioned to believe they want kisses. That's not real love, is it, Nagito? You tell him, Hope is awesome. For us as viewers, we feel disturbed. That's not how you spell it. For us as viewers, we feel disturbed, and I feel disturbed by that line. On one hand, their camaraderie feels stronger and more cohesive than ever. On the other, it is hollow, stripped of individuality and authenticity. This tension creates a form of dissonance. I don't know the word. I just don't know what other word you could use other than dissonance. They appear more alive, yet fundamentally less human. Their shared purpose mirrors Junko's ideology, despair as salvation. Watching them grow closer under that belief is painful, because it highlights how completely they've been stripped of their agency. It references the brainwashing point from before. It convinces people that their actions are justified, even virtuous, so long as they produce despair and allow them to experience its intensity. You know, that joke about Teru Teru really got me thinking, something he clearly never does, the perv. He wants to feed the homeless or whatever, right? But that belief becomes grotesquely distorted. He kills and cooks his own parents, creating a cycle of despair for himself, for them, and for whoever poor soul he feeds that drivel. In his mind, he is still fulfilling his goal, and yet he is a little bit, but no, this is not it. No way, that's ridiculous. The horror lies in that disconnect. The characters remain recognizable in their intentions, yet completely unrecognizable in their actions. The clash between who they were and what they've become reinforces the viewer's sense of despair. We are forced to watch the world collapse at the hands of characters we care about, characters who, from their own perspectives, believe they are doing something meaningful. I might cry, so sad. I think I need something to cheer me up. Like, love! One aspect Danganronpa tends to avoid like the plague, looking at you, Makoto and Kyoko. Yeah, I'm not giving it up till they kiss on live, bro. Don't test me. Is love. I'm kidding, it was a joke. Instead, they'd much rather Mikan slip over another 10 times and maybe, if we're lucky, have Chiaki and Hajime blush a bit at each other than tackle anything akin to a strong platonic friendship, let alone a slow burn romance. Though Despair Arc does bring in loving elements, and I think it's a really impactful addition. You have classmates fumbling over each other and having friendly banter, a strong, calming maternal energy from Chisa, and, most excitedly, charming crushes that all enhance the humanity and cuteness of our characters. To begin with the platonic bonds, it really enhances the slice of life feel this anime aims for at the beginning, when it just allows the characters to exist together. Like, small things, you know, Hiyoko slumping over Mahiru's desk so comfortably, or, you know, Ibuki teasing Fuyuhiko, putting meat in his mouth. It just sells the idea that these people are a community and are comfortable in each other's presence in a way that isn't forced. It ties back to what I mentioned all the way back in the first chapter. Without a killing game to spiral into a crisis within, the narrative creates this almost serene space for quieter, more personal interactions. As a result, we form stronger connections with the characters, making the eventual metaphorical trash compactor they're crushed in by Act 3 even more impactful. These moments reinforce that despite how exaggerated and weird they are, they're still fundamentally human beings capable of forming real bonds. That grounding works in contrast with their more absurd qualities. No matter how over the top their personalities or actions become, these relationships serve as a reminder that they are still shaped by the same emotional forces as anyone else. As for the romance, ooh, I bet you're on the edge of your seat to hear this. Yeah, bin off friendships, this is way more important, eh? It actually follows quite the similar framework, I can't lie, but it does kind of flip around from character to character, so that's good. Among the students, among us. Side note though, right? Where's Izuru going what Izuru? Izuru? No, Izuru Kamakura. Oh god, how long's left? Romance remains subtle and understated since they are a little nervous and struggle understanding their feelings. In contrast, the adults, particularly Juzo, Chisa and Kyosuke, that little love triangle, have a more explicit emotional tension though. They're still subtle and understated because they're also nervous. Some things never change. Focusing on the latter for a second, adding that tension between Juzo and Chisa especially, both of them holding feelings for Kyosuke, actually heightens their dynamic. It makes infiltrating Hope's Peak feel less like some James Bond movie plot and more like a tight-knit friendship group that all work together despite their qualms to reach a greater goal. Adding that romance element, especially without leading too far into that, you know, whole love triangle thing, and, you know, it's more like a teasing layer of banter, if anything, makes them much easier for us to relate to. As you can probably assume, that definitely adds to how we look at these new characters as the arc progresses. Love is something that unites all of us, and while it can be just as cheap of a play as fan service, to make it something present but not overwhelming is what makes it work. Adding on to that, the way the students interact is in a similar vein. You can feel the genuine awkwardness between Chiaki and Hajime. There's a bond clearly brewing, but none of it is clearly recognised. It simultaneously tackles that classist idea from Hajime's point of view, not being talented enough to deserve being her friend, and the human, almost mundane insecurity point of view. Chiaki, despite her talents, still wonders if she's lovable. It's a beautiful dichotomy that once again brings the story down to earth. Despite their different circumstances, both characters struggle with self-worth, which prevents them from openly expressing how they feel. Almost sillily, they overanalyze, choke it up to not being worthy friends when, in reality, they've both found a spark in each other that makes them more self-conscious. What makes this especially impactful is the lack of traditional payoff. Their relationship never fully materializes in a conventional sense. Instead, its emotional peak comes in their final scene together, long after they first met under tragic circumstances. Hajime is no longer himself and Chiaki is fatally wounded, barely able to think clearly. The feelings they never expressed become undeniable, yet still remain largely unspoken, because apparently Kodaka loves breaking our hearts. Oh yeah, we know that already. At the end of the day, these elements create quite the balance between the series' heightened, all-over-the-place storytelling and its more grounded emotionality. Plus, love is used so brilliantly to critique Hope's Peak as an institution. All it wants is to be admired, desired, but never loved. Ugh, that's icky. It gets in the way. No money equals no care, yet the people within it, the genuine goddamn human people that are the institution, they love. Oh, they do. And it's wonderful. They stutter, get flustered, and shy away just like anyone else does. As much as talent can be flanderized to the highest echelon, it can never, and let me say this, I want to hear it in the back, it can never remove humanity. Human blood, human sweat, human... We learn that from natural talent through the students and even artificial talent from Izuru. On both and all sides, love wins out. It's the quietest middle finger to the Academy this show gives us. Notice how I said quietest, not biggest middle finger. Well, that comes next. Death in the Academy is such an interesting contrast to love. While love is used to empower characters and reject the Academy's values, death is deeply overcome by it. Boom, you discover a body. Crusty old man Tengan says, "I'll take it from here." The first response to discovering a body is dismissal. The victim is immediately dehumanized, reduced to something insignificant, and quickly brushed aside. This reaction reveals how much Hope's Peak prioritizes utility. If someone is not contributing, whether through talent or as a blip on the reserve course numbers, they lose their value. If you're no longer making the number look bigger to investors, you're disregarded. Here's your pink slip. Reason, I can't be asked. Signed, Evil Corpo CEO. Kazuo Tenga. It's quite a grim reality. The Academy is so consumed by its image and ambitions that casualties are treated like nuisances rather than people who lived, loved, and mattered. Speaking of nuisances, the second response is concealment. It's an instant scramble to downplay the situation and get it under control. Combined with that initial dehumanization, this turns death into something transactional. The deceased are treated even worse than the reserve course. That's a bloody high achievement right there. Instead of people, their liabilities to erase. PR disasters. Whether it's, oop, looks like an accident, or it was those second-class uniform-wearing scum. The institution's actions reflect how little human life truly matters within its structure. Then, of course, gotta mention this bit, there's the reactions of those who do care. Characters respond with shock and grief, yet they are ignored or silenced. Even ultimate students, those the Academy supposedly values most, are dismissed when their emotions threaten the institution's image. Hope's Peak is willing to sacrifice its own prodigies if it means maintaining control of the narrative. What's a few talented students to an uprising? Bullshit! That's what it is. It's a twisted logic where, when worst comes to worst, they try to indoctrinate their students the same way they rationalize classism. They want the students to be in the exact right mindset to turn a blind eye when they're told to. Effectively, the show proves how humanity can be overridden when it harms the very system it works under, that at the end, there's a divine intervention from those at the top of the food chain to silence them. Alongside that, the way death is treated is structurally necessary for the story Despair Arc wants to tell. It is a gruesome, hellish narrative that places death at every turn. By sprinkling this behaviour early on, where both characters and audience are encouraged to gloss over tragedy, the narrative aligns us with the very mindset Junko seeks to create. She thrives in a world where death has already lost its weight. Here we go, a meta layer to the story. It allows Junko to slither through the cracks and inject meaning back into death, in the form of despair. She understands that every person matters to someone, and she weaponizes that truth. Wow, whoa, this does not make her justified or sympathetic, but what it does do is position her as a dark parallel to the Academy, where Hope's Peak strips death of meaning, Junko amplifies it to its most painful extreme. And from how little death wins in this show, the one time it responds, it is deadly. The protests leading to the tragedy feel like the culmination of everything that's been suppressed. Hatred from every death, every cover-up was unleashed at once. This sharply contrasts love by introducing karma. Karma's a bit... Love flourished quietly in a way that protested against the system without harming it directly. But once something does harm a system, it is beaten down repeatedly until one day it finally snaps and goes above and beyond in its counterattack. It highlights just how distorted Hope's Peak's values truly are, and watching that collapse unfold is as unsettling as it is, in some ways, satisfying. Satisfying, such a fun word. Shame this next section has none of it. A character who was so poorly adapted, it's almost fan fiction. A soldier, strong and fierce and riddled with complexity, is now riddled with only holes. Plot holes, I mean. Dun da da. Character assassination. Mukuro Ikusaba. Now, it'd be hard to hide how much I love Mukuro's character. The sheer idea of a soldier, hardened from a young age, exploited for her impressionability to become a heartless killing machine who clings to her only sense of emotion and meaning in this world, is just great. It opens up so many questions and avenues for explanation. Sadly, Danganronpa 3 looks at a less flattering avenue. A dark alley riddled with graffiti, which, by the way, you can't even see 3 meters in front of you, let alone the end of, and goes, yep, that's the right path. Mukuro is so incredibly fumbled here, and there's no way around that. When compared to her free time events in Trigger Happy Havoc and her wonderful portrayal in Danganronpa If, this version feels uncanny, like a contradiction of who she's established to be. To start with what the anime botched, and there's a whole lot of it, Mukuro's fixation on Junko is pushed to a lofty extreme that completely strips away her humanity. Don't get me wrong, Danganronpa isn't exactly known for its realism, yet its strongest, complex characters ground their exaggerated circumstances in believable reactions that we can relate to. It's what gets you crying at the end of every trial, that even these crazy kids from completely different backgrounds can feel just as deeply as we can. Mukuro's backstory should lend itself to a complex, restrained portrayal, yet instead, we're forced to gulp down yet another overdose of shock value. I find it hard to reconcile with how incestuous this framing is between her and Junko. What else does it achieve in the narrative other than provocation? Not only that, but said provocation is never interrogated by the story at all. It neither challenges nor contextualizes the dynamic in a critical way. Apparently, everyone else just ignores it for some reason, everyone bar from the camera and framing itself. That shit gets right in there with the fluffy outlines and the cartoonish love heart eyes ass filter. It'd sit right at home with 1-star slice of life on IMDb. It doesn't make it any better that, get this, the only character who does acknowledge it, Junko, encourages it. Don't get me wrong, and I'll preface this, if your balls are big enough, you can depict and tackle harmful dynamics like this. It's not necessarily an issue in itself, but failing to examine them totally is. All these voyeuristic, downright weird additions are seriously harmful, sanitizing Junko's abuse as if it were a Looney Tunes gag. A clear distinction should be made, Junko's framing and the narrative's framing. Separate them, otherwise there's no contrast. Give Mukuro some doubt, defiance, or something, any shred of humanity overriding her instinct. Otherwise, her character is just a weird fetish when it should be a horrifying look at how her child soldier brainwashing strips away her autonomy. Without that to ground it, it's just indulgence. Well done, mate. Honestly. As a result, much of Mukuro's screen time becomes defined by this single trait, overshadowing any deeper characterization, even if you're fishing for it like I am. That lack of depth becomes even more apparent when looking beyond the gimmick. There is a little exploration of Mukuro as an individual, her internal conflict, the identity she suppressed, or the contradictions within her loyalty to Junko. What's left is a character flatter than the 2D art style she's drawn in, reduced to a single exaggerated idea. Wait 1 second, do you want to hear my other flat joke? A character flatter than Kokichi after chapter 5, you know what I'm saying? Flattened. Hydraulic press. Brr splush. It frustrates me even more how everything else that isn't canon deals with Mukuro's character 10 times better. In Trigger Happy Havoc, her devotion to Junko is evident, but it's expressed through action, her willingness to follow through on complex self-destructive plans. It suggests her loyalty without tripping over itself by tagging fan service on the end for the sake of it. Though ain't nothing better than Mukuro's portrayal in Danganronpa If. Oh, I just love it, man. In that story, Mukuro's connection to Junko is equally intense, with none of the asterisks. She experiences doubt, conflict, and emotional vulnerability, all while continuing to follow Junko's every order, until she starts to grasp a kind of middle ground that satisfies everyone, even herself. She sacrifices, showing a quiet compassion in her willingness to live in indifference, so long as hope and despair can exist separately, each in their own space. Her loyalty is strained and, wow, is it questioned, but it never fully shuts off. It's not something that she can just abandon after years of manipulation shaping who she is. If Danganronpa 3 had explored that further, who Mukuro was before she reached that realization, or rather, before she met the mighty spears of Gungia, and how her ideology connects to despair itself and what it means to her sister, rather than just, her sister. It could have been a genuinely amazing portrayal, one that doesn't undermine her character but instead humanizes her, letting us see her for what she really is, like the others, a broken child. Because of this, Mukuro in Danganronpa 3 understandably, feels like all that was overwritten. The complexity that made her compelling is sidelined in favour of a more superficial interpretation, that's one way of putting it. Instead of expanding on her character, the series chops it in half and twists it for absolutely no reason. I mean, if we're talking tragedy, bin off the decimation of the planet as we know it and just absorb this characterization, you'll evaporate soon enough. Even worse is how, in Trigger Happy Havoc, Mukuro is essentially a ghost. Chapter 1, she's executed, even alive, she's just in cosplay anyway. We never got to see the real Mukuro, therefore Danganronpa 3 was her only chance at canonicity. In that sense, this portrayal is even more damning, as it defines her entire legacy as this flippant caricature of incestuous obsession. That's the disappointment. If I could wrap it all up, that'd be it. Mukuro is a character with significant narrative potential on all fronts, especially loyalty and internal conflict. Reducing her to a one-note trait that's disgusting in itself weakens her role in the story and completely undermines what made her stand out in the first place. But, it's a good but. Wait, the smelly one, Mukuro. Mukuro may have been narratively retconned, but what happens when you surgically retcon? Not only a character, but a person, a real human person who loved and lived as the rest of us, yet had their hopes scrambled into something vulnerable. Vulnerability that led to the Kamakura Project is arguably the most polarizing element of Despair Arc. It illustrates just how far Hope's Peak Academy has fallen, that they somehow see this madness as a reasonable course of action. Hell, they even consider it evolution. The bollocks on them, are you having a laugh? The very fact that the idea was entertained reveals how the writers intended to portray those operating behind the scenes. They see themselves as untouchable. So long as they remain in the shadows, they believe they cannot be held accountable. The steering committee is a faceless collective, a deliberate narrative choice that frustrates the audience to oblivion. There is no single individual to blame, only an anonymous group. It denies us a target for our anger and reinforces the illusion of Hope's Peak as an unassailable institution. Even when the truth is known, it cannot be meaningfully challenged. No one will believe it for starters, and anyway, there's no face to confront. The result is acceptance. We're forced to accept the inevitability of these events, that it's true, this'll just happen. Not maybe, not if, it will. And call me Junko all you want, but that despair is sweet, bro. The project also deepens the Academy's disturbing perception of talent. Those in power could care less about the integrity of Hope. All they're bothered about is the prestige and profit, whatever will boost their illusion of control over the world. They act with a god complex, convinced they can manipulate Hope as if it was some kind of controllable substance? I don't know much about science, but something's telling me reserve course brains aren't solvents, and Hope isn't some raw material you can extract as a solute. But what do they care, eh? This mindset exposes how little a view they have of the public. They seriously assume people will just accept artificial hope without question, simply because it bears the Hope's Peak name. Not to say that they're wrong. You know what? There's probably some idiots out there who would. I think I'm that idiot. They use their reputation to exploit people. In this light, the Academy strays further and further away from a highbrow educational institution and further toward a cult, presenting itself all hunky-dory and virtuous just so it can exploit its worshippers. Virtuous worshippers? What am I, a rapper? What am I? The smelly one. Furthermore, the Kamakura project highlights the dehumanization of reserve course students. Most things do by this point. As if systemic discrimination weren't already enough, the Academy targets individuals at their very lowest. Hajime is approached at his most vulnerable, making him susceptible to manipulation and impulsive decision-making. With how fucked up and deliberate that is, it reflects a system designed to exploit weakness. It just keeps reinforcing these class divisions between the main and reserve course. They want the difference between the two to be larger so they can have a greater hand over the world. It's an abhorrent situation that truly reveals the sickening truth behind the Academy. In that sense, they become bullies. People who learned how to disguise their blatant bullying as manipulation so they can get what they want. After all, they built a system that punished these people and treated them like dirt. Then they swoop in at just the right moment to fix everything for them. Almost like a game. For the audience, this means that we're presented with an institution that feels like it needs to be destroyed. We beg for its downfall because of how their evil is presented. It also deepens how we view Hajime. We see glimpses of who he is without the burden of talent. Freer, more expressive, like an actual goddamn person. Then, soon enough, we see him plagued with these thoughts that hinder the flourishing we know he has in him. Understanding that Hajime never got to live that way as himself, only in a simulation, because this is what happened to him, it's meant to stink. Ultimately, the Kamakura project represents Hope's Peak Academy's moral collapse. That's the cool title I put in my notes when organising the chapters, and I really wanted to fit it in somewhere, so glad I did. It also tugs on the heartstrings by unearthing the brutal brutal pressure and manipulation the subject was under at the time. Notice how I said subject specifically, not Hajime. The person they influenced him to be, the person they made him beg to become, that's not the work of a human, but a human response to an inhuman situation. We know who Hajime is. It's just unfortunate he was never able to see that before his mind was altered permanently. Thankfully, Hajime does not end there, because a large part of his life at Hope's Peak was with his absolute best friend Chiaki. I know it's hard to believe, but this is a segue. Chiaki Nenami, what a character. I simply must discuss her, particularly what she represents in the narrative. Chiaki serves as the emotional core of the group. She is the single unifying force that brings Class 77B together. This stands, interestingly, divergent to her own insecurity. Despite struggling socially, she becomes the person everyone depends on. Her character is an example to the audience audience of how it doesn't take long to find your people when you open yourselves to them and instigate despite your anxieties. Chiaki ends up the most relatable person in the entire academy. She acts so intentionally authentic, yet embodies one of the largest issues many of us face. It empowers us to look to her as the center of authenticity in the narrative. She doesn't bring the plot forward, nor is she acting with an agenda like Chisa is as the protagonist and driving force, so Chiaki is just allowed to be the passive character, making small, gradual progress. That makes the shift in her role all the more devastating. She is forcibly transformed from a quiet presence to the central catalyst for her classmates' despair. Leading into her execution, it's deliberately crafted to be jarring. Chiaki is pulled from the narrative's periphery and thrust into its center, becoming the focal point in the most brutal way possible. The story initially leads us to believe that the despair video will act as the primary tool for spreading despair, a universal, impersonal method. Instead, Junko subverts his expectation by targeting something far more intimate, a person. Specifically, she targets the very embodiment of hope within the group. As the class's emotional anchor, Chiaki's death carries unparalleled weight. Her role as a symbol of hope makes her the ideal conduit for despair. Through this, the narrative leaves the audience shocked and questioning where Junko's ideology actually ends. It ties back to the ambiguity behind despair, as we see that Junko targets those who will be most beneficial to her plan, talented people at the height of their ability, and understands that the more despair she causes, the more loyal they will become. She didn't have to do this, yet she chose to solely because she believes it will serve her plan, in a way the despair video simply couldn't. This decision deepens the horror, demonstrating that despair is most powerful when it is personal. But, why Chiaki? Big questions only here on the Cryptid YouTube channel. Well, narratively, she's the only character who could fill that role, if you think about it. It had to be a classmate, someone who embodied youthful innocence, to create a stark contrast with the cruelty inflicted upon her. Chiaki's character, still in the process of learning how to connect with others, is uniquely vulnerable. That vulnerability is exploited, turning her growth directly into a mechanism for suffering. She also serves as a recognizable face, a recontextualizing force for Danganronpa 2. This version of Chiaki provides a human foundation for her AI counterpart, reframing the latter, giving her purpose beyond a creation. Her death retroactively intensifies the tragedy of the second game. Makoto's decision to recreate her as a means of reaching the remnants of despair becomes more poignant. He does so in an attempt to restore something very, very real, to try and reignite that flame that was snuffed out years ago in this very moment we see on screen. Her execution is drawn out to maximize despair. It acts as its own live method of brainwashing. It links back to the overarching theme of induced despair. Chiaki was pure, natural hope, yet was plunged into despair in such a way that caused a specific reaction in her classmates. What they witness is not entirely real, it is curated, framed to amplify the despair while distancing them from the truth. As a result, they are denied even the closure of witnessing her death authentically. They only saw what Junko wanted them to see, a brutal end that enforces the feeling of loss and dissonance. It becomes tragic for Chiaki who, as much as she wished for and was working toward being social, she ultimately ends up dying alone. Junko weaponizing her psyche and long for friendship to deepen the impact of despair, and to end it in silence while Chiaki writhes on the floor in pain. It speaks for itself. Once the execution music ended, Chiaki is ultimately just a human, dying alone as the ghost of the man she loved and cared for stands before her. To see her retreat into what she knows, loves, and what brings her comfort, video games, just wanting to play one more game, highlights that innocence I mentioned earlier. Ultimately, after all her self-doubt, she came to the conclusion that none of it was worth it, that all the spreading out she did to flourish socially ended in her torture, weaponization, and eventual demise. It really makes Chiaki even more relatable, as she just wants comfort and just wants to go back to the days where she and Hajime played video games. She believes that if she just returns to burying her head in a screen, not showing any true personality, or putting the screen down to talk, she will be loved again. She will have those moments, regardless of how restricting they were at the time. There's a reason she decided to branch out in the first place, because she hated not being able to connect without a screen before her. But now she just rejects all that. She wants to go back. It's so heartbreaking as we see her desperation to be loved expressed harmfully. She embraces something that deep down she knows she hated, but at least it's better than this. Her death also marks a critical moment for Izuru. For the first time, he reacts wordlessly but unmistakably. His tears signal the presence of something human beneath the constructed persona. This reinforces one of the series' central ideas, that artificial talent and manufactured identity are ultimately hollow. The only thing worthy of ultimate in that regard. Chiaki's influence is so profound that it disrupts even the most detached individual, revealing, well, there are limits to imposed perfection, I suppose. What makes this scene so powerful is its refusal to offer comfort. Chiaki is not granted closure, recognition, or even the reassurance that she mattered in her final moments. This absence is deliberate. It denies the audience the emotional resolution they might expect, replacing it with a stark, unembellished portrayal of loss. On a broader level, Chiaki's death challenges one of the core tenets of Danganronpa, that hope will ultimately prevail. Even in despair, hope wins out. Yet, despite all of the despair she endures, Chiaki's hope only dims. In fact, Despair Arc acknowledges this through a visual illusion, Chiaki witnessing her class's smiley faces at the end of her desperate pursuits. The writers knew they were subverting the happy, albeit bittersweet ending we always get. From Makoto's rejection of despair and pursuit of hope, Hajime's push to become himself and form his identity, to finally Shuichi rejecting hope and despair in a way that leaves a lasting, non-institutionalized version of hope that breaks an endless cycle. It's always ended somewhat positively. Here, it's just the beginning. It ties Danganronpa's hope loop all the way back to the first time that innocence was truly broken. Through this, Chiaki not only breaks the familiar tropes, but becomes an example for the single event that ended the world. The tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy was the chaos that spreads despair, an example of Junko's wrath, and Chiaki's execution was highlighting the real human people affected by it, the impact that despair ultimately has. Oh, I said it, didn't I? No way. The what? Okay, well, I guess there's no need to hide it from you anymore, is there? I've danced around it for too long, so... Swoosh. tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy is without question the most pivotal moment in the Danganronpa series. It represents the death of hope and in many ways the birth of despair. From its opening to its conclusion, the scene delivers one of the most brutal and unsettling sequences in the franchise, presented without a moment of restraint. While there's certainly moments in the series that shock us, disturb us like nothing else, the discomfort here doesn't stem primarily from the violence. I'm not going to rule it out, but you know, Mukuro shoots a student in cold blood moments earlier, yet it barely registers. It feels almost routine. After all, she's at her sister's every beck and call, right? What truly unsettles is what follows. Junko hands her a music sheet with a grin to rival all grins, and Mukuro begins to sing. The moment the ultimate soldier starts singing, the tone shifts into something deeply unnatural. In the games, the execution themes are all exaggeratedly playful. That's me coining a new term. It's goofy, meant to clash with the horror unfolding before us. Here, however, the most gruesome scene in the series is underscored by something soft and almost angelic, a hymn-like melody about freedom and transcendence. It feels choral, yet it comes from a single voice, the very person enabling the tragedy, someone with the power to stop it at any moment, yet chooses not to under Junko's ever-present fashionista fingertips. This contrast creates a sense of distance. We are positioned like Junko herself, watching events unfold through multiple screens in her little villain lair. Bop, 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 boom, look at all them scenes. We're removed from it, yet fully aware of the pain and despair it's causing. The result is a profound feeling of helplessness. We cannot intervene, we can only observe. It's even more disturbing with the juxtaposition of comfort and horror. The music evokes warmth and serenity, floating off to some faraway land, green ogre and all that, gingerbread man. But the visuals, oh, the visuals do not abide by that framework. It's unfiltered brutality before us, like being strapped to a chair in a cozy warm room, soft jazz playing through the record player, while you're forced to watch live leak videos on repeat. That contradiction implicates us. This scene feels almost sacred in its presentation, even as it depicts something very, very wrong. Unlike the executions in the games, with that juicy sense of mockery we know all too well, as though Junko herself is having a good old chuckle behind the scenes, this moment is devoid of that theatricality. Junko's reaction is subdued. She buries her face in a Monokuma plush, her expression completely unreadable. There's no joy in that expression, nor any kind of, I'm gonna go crazy and make light of this, haha, jokes. Her eyes read only one emotion, an even more unsettling one. Satisfaction. A complete lack of spectacle from the one person who tries to force it into every minor interaction in her life. We are left with only the confirmation that Junko's plan is unfolding. Right or wrong, no inclination either way. It's simply that it's happening. The song itself frames the events as something weirdly meaningful. It resembles a hymn for a dying world, a final expression of hope repurposed to accompany its own destruction. The imagery and the music clash in a way that suggests transformation from one plane of existence to another. It doesn't try to justify itself in any way or make itself righteous. It presents itself, this scene, these deaths, as something disturbingly absolute, far above our understanding of morality. As viewers, we're placed in a contradictory position. Too formal. We're placed in a sticky situation. That's not it. The music aligns us with Junko, distancing us from the immediate violence while the visuals suck us directly into it. We are both observers and witnesses, detached absolutely, yet uncomfortably present. And there's the tonal whiplash setting in. We're left with no stable emotional ground to stand on. It all just sinks into a void. Oh, That lingering coldness is what sets this scene apart. Earlier moments in Despair Arc, no matter how violent, were often interrupted. Oh hey Chisa, look at good old Nagito blowing shit up again, the cheeky devil you. Yet here it's 8 minutes of pure scene. There's no interruptions. This is what's happening right now. The music could have just nudged itself a little bit towards some kind of joy or like fun maybe. Cross my heart and hope it crashes and burns, but even irony? That's unlike you, Junko. Instead, it embodies hope. Hope twisted into something unrecognizable. It's that transcendence again I just talked about, as if the violence is part of a larger, almost divine transformation. In stripping away that performative despair with all the Junkoisms and stuff, the scene leaves us with something far more raw, the event. It's the final time I'll say it, we are shown seen, and seen only. Junko's narration attempts to append hope and despair above this carnage, but the visuals don't connect at all. What we see doesn't inherently belong to Danganronpa's visual language. The pink blood is there, sure, but only because we're viewing the scene through Junko's lens. Aside from that, it's so far outside of it, so fucking extreme, that it requires Junko's voice to contextualize it, completely shoving it back into her ideology. That, perhaps, is what makes the scene so the punch, you know, it just shows something so severe and out of this world that it almost escapes definition, requiring Junko herself to reshape it into something close to meaning. Now, what's something this scene does that many don't? Oh, not much, but it does viciously assault our eyes with more than just death. Oh, they could have just died, but no. Never mind. G to the O to the R to the E, G-O-R-E, gore. The tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy is so too gruesome. But the why is a good place to start. Why is it so visceral and unfiltered? Well, what makes this violence so effective is that it's never sensationalized. It presents death as a concept and shows us death. It simply shows us what happens when a group of students are locked in a room and told to kill. There is no structure, no familiar rules to fall back on, unlike the killing game format where one murder leads to the investigation, trial and execution. Everyone here becomes the killer, the victim and the executioner all at once. The usual Danganronpa loop is controlled and methodical. You have your guy, and your Monokuma. In contrast, this sequence is chaotic and immediate. You can't plan, nor can you cover up. Oh, you wanted a nice room to head back to, a bed to sleep in, lock your door? Too bad! That'd be a waste of resources and Junko's on her lunch in a minute, so let's make this snappy. The students are confined together, forced into confrontation and driven by panic. Once the first act of violence occurs, it triggers a chain reaction. Bottoms up. Fear escalates into desperation, desperation into violence, and violence into ew, that's disgusting, what the fuck happened to his clavicle? It's an infinite loop. One action sparks countless others until no one is left, and damn it, I blame the gun guy. If he hadn't picked up that gun, he wouldn't have fell on the sword, and none of this would have happened. This pacing makes the scene far more difficult to process. Up to this point, Despair Arc and Danganronpa as a whole has conditioned us to expect structured, deliberate deaths. Hell, we see this earlier in the arc with Natsumi and Sato who die off screen. Oh, that guy who Junko tortured, where the execution music's playing and she's mocking the situation and all that. That control and distance are still maintained even here. But this specific scene, the structure might as well be a back scratcher. Throw it in the trash with the rest. The suddenness hits with overwhelming force, leaving the viewers no time to emotionally catch up. What intensifies this effect is the presence of motive. That poor girl wailing about her mum being kidnapped, how she'll do anything to free her, even slaughtering her own friends for it. Right there, the humanity of the situation is undeniable. These are people with lives, families, dreams, goals, and aspirations, yet they are reduced to acting on pure survival instinct. It also sprinkles a sense of familiarity into the mix. They are students, contained, given a motive, left to kill. Just like the killing game, we empathize with them. but that empathy is contrasted by just how feverish and brutal these killings are. The gore, believe it or not, amplifies the dissonance. The violence is graphic, but the individuals remain largely unknown to us, and their deaths happen so quickly that we cannot fully process them. For us, there's a sense of meaninglessness. Their lives hold incredible value as individuals and as a cataclysmic event in the story, but we are denied the time and space to truly comprehend it. We understand there's no way in this world we'll be able to reach them, as they die as quickly as they appear. That absence of meaning reinforces the despair. The takeaway from this is painful. Under the right conditions, anyone can turn on anyone. This de-individualization is crucial both thematically and in universe. This tragedy is later repurposed into the despair video, meaning it must function on a mass scale. If the audience were too personally connected to each victim, the effect would narrow. Instead, the scene presents suffering in a way that compromises the psyche as much as it can. Relentless, visceral, all universally disturbing. Although, on an individual basis, the more personalized the despair, the better, on a grand scale, the best you can do is create the most despair-inducing scene that attaches itself to rudimentary psychological principles all humans share. Though, for the poor student council themselves, it's far from indiscriminate. What feels instantaneous to us stretches to an intense eternity for them. Their senses are on it, hyper-aware, not to mention the constant state of fear, fully conscious of both their motives and the consequences of their actions. Their despair is deeply personal, even as it appears abstract to us. The explicit nature of the gore also serves a clear purpose within Junko's ideology. The more graphic the act, the stronger its psychological impact. Let me ask you a little bit of something, right? What's the difference between a headline and a shock video? Let's say they contain the same thing. A headline is easier to dismiss, as it doesn't imprint itself in the human mind as something too important. By contrast, the more violent and gruesome the shock video, the deeper the brain registers its contents as something worth remembering, intensely important for avoiding danger. From Junko's perspective, this makes it an ideal tool for spreading despair on a large scale. At the same time, stripping the scene of its usual personality makes it feel more like a genuine tragedy. The pink blood becomes Junko's way of steering it back toward her original intent. But without other stylizations, being a prime example here, it loses its meaning. She initially sees no reason to gamify it, yet once it begins, she starts inserting herself, trying to regain control over how it's interpreted. In that sense, the scene feels truly hopeless, too real, almost like the writers are trying to convince us we're still watching the same program. Speaking of that gamification, the killing game is designed to cultivate despair and sustain it over time. The tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy, by contrast, serves a different purpose: to eradicate hope. In the games, it starts with characters inside a killing environment. They get close to each other in there, which enhances the despair when one is killed, but there is no sense of a better life before this point. Crucial distinction. The hope that is fostered is done so in a killing environment. In Despair Arc, we are shown characters loving, bonding, and living happily with each other. The world is shown to be deeply flawed, sure, hiding a dark secret, sure, but overall, happy, authentic from our character's point of view. To them, they are being real. Life is grown in a non-pressurized environment. The more gruesome this scene is, the more it breaks down that illusion of safety, and the more it drags us down to its level from such a high pedestal of hope. Finally, the gore also reflects Junko's own development. Yes, we're back to Junko's innocence once again. All roads lead to Junko Enoshima, right, I guess. We get it, she's experimenting, she's messing about, yada yada, but where does this scene fit into that? Well, the raw extremity of it contrasts with the more controlled, theatrical despair of the killing game. games. Over time, she refines her methods, shifting from chaotic, overwhelming violence to structured, performative suffering. You future arc heads would recognise that sentence from elsewhere, you cheeky bugger you. To contrast that innocence by having her witness the extreme of the extreme, the most gruesome, blood-curdling screens of death ever witnessed, it allows us to see how she refines her tastes over time. She sees it all unfold, from intimate despair to worldwide despair, to controlled despair to the most gruesome of despair, and decides which one works best. This evolution is clearly reflected in Chiaki's execution, which serves as a prime example of controlled despair. While still brutal, it more closely resembles the structure of a traditional killing game, complete with music, a faintly light-hearted presentation, and the gradual escalation of increasingly elaborate traps. Notably, the gore is not the focus during the execution itself. Instead, it occurs afterward in silence in that beautifully paced unseen moment. As a result, the execution avoids explicit violence, relying instead on implication, just as many of the ones we're familiar with do. By contrast, the tragedy presents the opposite extreme. It is entirely unstructured and unfiltered. Placing these two approaches side by side introduces even more contrast, so it does. One is carefully orchestrated and performative, while the other is chaotic and indiscriminate. Together, they highlight the full spectrum of despair, from controlled spectacle to raw, overwhelming destruction. And that marks the end of Hope's Peak. Hope's Peak marks the end of civilization as we know it. The world falls into ruin, and of course, nobody says it better than the devilish embodiment of evil herself. Hope is harmony, a just heart moving toward the light. Despair is hope's polar opposite. It is messy and confusing. It swallows up love, hatred, and everything else, because not knowing where you will end up is despair. Despair is even what you cannot predict. Only despair's unpredictability can save you from a boring future.
Danganronpa.